Dear friends of books and voices of revelation, welcome to the narration of the following audio book. From Babylon to Timbuktu. History of the Ancient Black Races, including the Black Hebrews. By Rudolph Windsord. Chapter 1. The Ancient Black Civilization. More than 6,000 years ago, in the land called Mesopotamia, the most remarkable civilization then known to mankind developed. This civilization was centered between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These rivers originate in the mountains of Armenia and flow in a southeasterly direction toward the Persian Gulf. The soil in this area is tremendously fertile due to the alluvial deposits carried by the two rivers. European civilization developed from the ancient black civilization. Without this black civilization, white domination and influence, as we know it today, would have been unlikely. In the southern part of the Tigris-Euphrates region, various tribes entrenched themselves. This southern part was known at different times by many names, among which are Sumer, Akkad, or Akkad, and Chaldea, but the name best known to us is Babylon. This area was also the site of the Garden of Eden, and the inhabitants of this region were jet black in color. I will prove conclusively that blacks have the oldest history of all humans. The best source of evidence available is the history of the Jews, known as the Bible. In Genesis 2 verse 10, it is written, "And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it separated and became 4 heads. There were 4 rivers that watered the Garden of Eden. I will name the 3rd and 4th rivers first, then I will move on to the 1st and 2nd, because it best fits my line of reasoning." Genesis 2 verse 14 says, "And the name of the 3rd river is Hidek, it goes out to the division of Assyria. And the 4th river is the Euphrates." Commentators and scholars have identified the Hidek River. They say it is the Tigris River. Now I will quote Genesis 2 verse 13. "Since the Garden of Eden is associated with the land of Ethiopia, we can conclude that the people were black." Rashi, the 11th century Bible commentator, said that the Gihon is the Nile River that runs through East Africa. Rashi most likely makes this claim because the Nile flows into Ethiopia and into Egypt. Dr. Spicer, who was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, said, "There is no basis for the diversion of the Gihon to Ethiopia. He meant Ethiopia in Africa, not to speak of the Pison in various remote parts of the world." I agree with Dr. Spicer that we are not to look for the Gihon in Africa, nor for the Pison in a remote part of the earth, but that we are to look for the Pison and the Gihon in the valley of the Tigris, Euphrates. There were 2 Ethiopian nations in antiquity, Eastern Ethiopia and Western Ethiopia. Dr. Spicer did not make this point clear, possibly through an oversight. There was an Ethiopian civilization in southern Mesopotamia, Babylon, but the inhabitants of this region did not use their tribal name, Ethiopia, to designate their nationality. They called themselves by the name of the cities they built and inhabited, or they called themselves after an event which occurred there. For example, God confused the language of the people at the Tower of Babel. Babel means confusion in Hebrew. That is why the Ethiopian tribes called themselves Babylonians, in reference to the name of the city they built. There are many nations which do not call themselves by their true nationality. For example, white Australians came from England, but the English people living in Australia do not call themselves by their ancestral name. They call themselves by the name of the country they colonized, which is Australia. The people of Australia are represented in the United Nations by the name of their nation, Australia, and not by their ancestral name, England. The people who resided in the lower part of the Tigris-Euphrates Valley were Ethiopians, of black complexion. We read in Genesis 10 verse 8, that Cush begot Nimrod. The word Cush means Ethiopia, and Cusel was the father of the Ethiopians. For the meaning of the word Cusack Webster's New Collegiate Dictionary, Nimrod was a mighty Ethiopian conqueror and builder in the land of Shinar. We find in Genesis 10 verses 8 and 10, that Nimrod ruled over such cities as Babylon, Erech, Akkad, or Akkad. All of these cities are Guttate in the land of Shinar. Another name for Shinar is Sinner. This civilization was of a high order, and one of the oldest of antiquity. In Genesis 10 verse 7, we read, "And the sons of Cush, Seba and Havilah." We have now learned that Havilah was the son of Cush, who was an Ethiopian. The word Havilah became the name of a tribe and a region, known as the land of Havilah, and the Havilites, Ethiopians, lived in the land of Havilah. Furthermore, scholars have located this land near the Persian Gulf. In searching for the land of Havilah, we find that there was another Havilah who was one of the sons of Joktan, read Genesis 10 verses 26 and 29, but this Havilah was from the line of Shem, read Genesis 10 verse 22. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The sons of Shem are called Semites. The sons of Ham are called Manhites, and the sons of Japheth are called Japhites. We must not confuse Havilah, the son of Joktan, with Havilah, the son of Cush. Now it is logical to conclude that Havilah, the son of Cush, is intended in Genesis 2 verse 11 to be the Havilah of the land of Havilah, for that Havilah was a Cushite, Ethiopian. His habitation would naturally be adjacent to his brother, Nimrod, who ruled Babylon. Abraham was one of the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel, and Abraham's father, Ter, came from the land of Ur of the Chaldees, Genesis 11 verses 26 and 28. The land of Ur of the Chaldees was located on the southern part of the Euphrates. The Chaldeans were one of the many Cushite tribes. Cush means black, according to the Bible dictionary. This dictionary further defines Cush, the name of a son of Ham, apparently the eldest, and of a territory or territories occupied by his descendants. The Cushites apparently ranged over tracts running from the Upper Nile to the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. History offers many connections between Babylon, Arabia, and Ethiopia. There is ample evidence that the ancient nations of Babylon, Akkadian, Sumer, and Chaldea were inhabited by Cushite, Ethiopian, tribes on all sides of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. The rivers Pison and Gihon, mentioned in Genesis 2 verses 11 and 13, meander and twist through the land of Havilah, somewhere near the Persian Gulf. Although it is difficult to identify these 2 rivers exactly, the center of the Garden of Eden was most likely in the lower Tigris-Euphrates valley. This was the most fertile region in the Middle East, with its numerous canals and lakes. No wonder it was called the Garden of Eden. It was so well watered that the vegetation looked better than an English park. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers join before reaching the Persian Gulf, then they separate again, making 4 rivers from the channels of these 2 rivers. This is one of the most highly valued theories of the authorities. The modern names of the rivers that flow into the Tigris and Euphrates are the Great Zab, south of Nineveh, the Little Zab, south of the Great Zab. The Diyala River flows into the Tigris at Baghdad, Iraq. The ancient Black Civilization. Sumer and Kish. Before the dispersion of mankind at the Tower of Babel, their region was not called Babylon. Only after the fusion of language and the dispersion of the people was the tower given the name Babel. This conclusion is arrived at by logic. What was the name of this region and the tower before the confusion of language and dispersion? Webster's Dictionary, Gazetteer section, says that Sinnar is the southern division of ancient Babylon. Furthermore, this same dictionary says on page 849, Sumerian, the Pi-Semitic population of the lower Euphrates Valley. The pre-Semitic population means that the Black Sumerians were the first to arrive. This point is in harmony with my original position that the peoples of Lower Mesopotamia were Eastern Ethiopians. These Sumerians or Ethiopians and their relatives seem to have settled along stretches from Mesopotamia to India. This area now includes southern Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and northwestern India. The first and second allusion to Sumeria in the Bible is found in Genesis 10 verse 10, and Genesis 11 verse 1, under the name of Shinar. Webster's Dictionary, Gazetteer section, alludes to this relationship of Shinar and Sinnar. There is definitely a blood relationship between the Dravidian tribes of India and the Sumerians of Ethiopia. The Sumerian civilization preceded the Babylonian. The Sumerians founded cities that existed for more than 4,000 years. Years before Christ. Uchas, Eridu, Idotagash, Nippur, Kish and Ur. Archaeologists have found skeletons of the ancient Dravidian types and Neda, Ur and Kish. The ancient Sumerian figurines resemble the figurines of the Dravidian civilization. Chapter 2. The origin of the white race. After the destruction of mankind by the flood, Noah and his wife, his 3 sons and their wives were the only people who were saved. Noah's sons were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. From these three sons of Noah the whole earth was populated. The ark rested on Mount Ararat. Mount Ararat was located in the land of Armenia. The words Armenia and Ararat mean high ground. The whole earth at this time had one language and one tongue. Most of the people lived in the plain of Shinar, in Hebrew, the valley of Shinar. Men began to gather in the land and build a tower to heaven. The Jewish historian, Josephus, says, God also commanded them to send out colonies abroad to populate the whole earth, but the people did not obey God. Now when man was building the tower, God disapproved of his building because it showed a disbelief in his word. The deity had promised Noah that he would not again destroy the earth by water. Nimrod, the Ethiopian, was the leader of the conspiracy against God. He was a powerful man and a conqueror. He had the people under his dictatorship. When God considered what had been done, he confused the language of men and scattered them to the four directions of the earth. Noah's sons were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Because the world was populated from these three sons of Noah, it is appropriate to classify men only according to this classification. Semites, Hamites and Japhlites, and not Caucasoids, Mongoloids or Negroids. This last category is a modern anthropological classification which we will discuss later. The parts of the earth inhabited by the sons of Shem were parts of the territory of Assyria and Elam, Persia, east of the Tigris River, the eastern part of Syria, and parts of the Arabian Peninsula. All of Shem's sons were black. This position will be supported by arguments and facts later. The second classification of mankind was that of the Hamites, who controlled the great centers of civilization in ancient times, 4000 BCE shortly after the flood. This civilization included the continent of Africa, the land of Canaan, Israel, parts of Arabia, Syria, Phoenicia, Turkey, Babylonia, southern Persia, Iran, eastern Pakistan, and a large part of the India. The third classification of mankind was that of the Japhites, from Japheth, who was the youngest son of Noah. Japheth's descendants occupied the islands of the Gentiles, the territories on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea in Europe and parts of Asia Minor, from where they spread northward throughout the European continent and much of Asia. After Noah's ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, and the dispersion of the sons of men at the Tower of Babel, the descendants of Japheth traveled west, north, and northeast to Mount Ararat and the Caucasus Mountains. The Japhites settled near the Taurus and Amanus Mountains, in Turkey. They traveled as far as the Tanais River in southeastern Russia, and throughout Europe to Cadiz, Spain. The sons of Japheth were Cumma, Magog, Avail, Tubal, Meshachli, and Tiras, Genesis 10 verse 2. Cumma was the ancestor of the early Cimmerians, and of the later Cimbri, including other offshoots of the Celtic family, and of the present-day Gauls of Ireland, Scotland, and the Hebridean Islands. Homer, the Greek, described these Cimmerians as dwelling in a remote place of mist and darkness. This place was situated north of the Black Sea. Japheth's second son was Magog, the father of the Magogites. Josephus said that the Greeks called this people Scythians. The Scythians included all the wandering tribes who lived mainly near the northern Black and Caspian seas. The ancients considered them to be tremendously lacking in intelligence and civilization. Japheth's third son was Madai, the father of the Medes. They were situated on the southern part of the Caspian Sea, and later they united with the Persians to form a single race. From Jovan, the fourth son of Japheth, came the Ionians and all the Greeks. Tubal, the fifth son of Japheth, is associated with Jovan, Isaiah 66:19. Meshach and Tubal, Ezekiel 32 verse 26, and Ezekiel 39 verse 1, are northern nations, north of the focal point of the land of Israel. Josephus identified the descendants of Tubal with the early Iberians, Iberes. They were the inhabitants of the territory lying between the Caspian and Euxine seas, which is Georgia, southern Russia. Japheth's last son was Tiras, the father or ancestor of the Thracians. This land, Thrace, was situated north of Turkey, Asia Minor, and northeast of Greece. Japheth's grandson, Ashkenaz, formed the Germanic race. In the Hebrew language the word means German. By 378 AD, the Germanic tribes were on the move. They were known by these names: Lombards, Burgundians, Franks, Saxons, Angles, Jutes, Ostrogoths, Visigoths, Swabi, and Vandals. These 10 Germanic barbarian tribes settled throughout Western Europe and blended into the modern nations of Western Europe as we know them today. All of these tribes were descendants of Japheth. The ancients did not classify races by skin color, as do the modern nations of Europe and the Americas. The ancients, including the Greeks and Romans, identified people by their national or tribal names. They used names such as Visigoths, Vandals, Saxons, Ethiopians, Carthaginians, Jews, Arabs, Persians, Babylonians, Egyptians, and Moors. They did not use the term Negro, which is a modern term, to refer to the black races or the word Caucasian to refer to the white races. Dividing the world along a color line was an idea that originated with white supremacists in Europe after the Renaissance. Europeans did not have any great civilization immediately after the fall of Greece and Rome. During the Middle Ages, the black nations of Africa and Asia had the greatest political, economic, educational, and military influence in the world. During this time, Europe was in a state of darkness for 1,000 years. In the 17th century and later, Europe began to emerge from the mire of ignorance, and some Germans and others conceived of themselves as belonging to a superior race. The German Johann F. Blumenbach, 1752 and 1840, was the first to divide mankind according to skin color. Until then, no such attempt had been made. His classification established a color line, to the detriment of later generations. Mr. Blumenbach classified 5 main races of mankind: the Caucasian, the Mongolian, the Katibian, the American Indians, and the Malay. The anthropologist Blumenbach named the whites after the Caucasus Mountains, located between the Black and Caspian Seas, because he thought that the purest whites originated there. Blumenbach was a racist, as was J. A. Gobineau. A third man named H. S. Chamberlain wanted to promote the supremacy of the white Nordic race and its culture. These men attributed psychological value and importance to race. This was racism and led to a horrible and vicious racial philosophy and the persecution of Jews in Nazi Germany. T. R. Garth wrote in his book Link Psychology, 1931. Any disposition on our part to deny any race the right to free and full development must be taken as an indication of rationalization because of racial prejudice, and such an attitude is inexcusable in an intelligent population. As I have shown, the first civilizations began in North Africa and the Middle East among the black races. Read about Asian blacks in Herbert Wendt. It began at Babel, a book on the origin of races. We have more than enough evidence that the white races began near the Caucasus Mountains, and from there spread north, northwest, and northeast into Europe and Asiatic Russia. Now, we know that the Japhites, Europeans, white today. Were they originally white from their ancestor, Japheth, or did a change in the skin color of Japheth's descendants materialize? This question is difficult to answer. I have been told that Japheth was a black man, but he wanted to be white, so God changed him into a white man. There is no proof for this theory. However, scientists and anthropologists have found different types of mutations in certain parts of the world. A physical mutation is a sudden variation or change, the offspring differing from their parents in some prominent characteristic, also a major change in the chromosomes or genes that determine inheritance. The blonde hair of the black Australian Aborigines is an example of a mutation, and albinos are probably a good example of mutations with their white skin, woolly hair, thick lips, and Ethiopian noses. Any sudden change from the normal should be considered a mutation. Other examples of mutations are rubismo or whiteness among monkeys, apes, and chimpanzees. Among the descendants of Japheth, major mutations or changes occurred. This is obvious because of their white skin. In other words, they were black at one time, but their skin changed to white. This phenomenon can be understood in view of the total world population. More than 2/3 of the world's population is made up of black people. It is a ratio of 2 to 1. 2 of Noah's 3 sons remained black. We know this to be true because many of the people throughout Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the islands of the Pacific Ocean are yellow, brown, or black. They have facial features like the Congoid Africans, especially the Vietnamese, the Filipinos, the people of India, who are a mixture of black Dravidians and Indo-Europeans, the Thais, the Burmese and Indonesians, the Guineans, the Sumatrans, and the Aborigines of Australia, etc. One can get a good idea of the characteristics of these people by reading the geographical journals and observing the foreign students who come from these countries. There was an Indo-European, Germanic, invasion of the Middle East between 2000 and 1500 BC. These Germanic tribes mixed with the black peoples they traveled through. This mixing made people in Syria, Babylon, Assyria, Persia, India, and parts of Arabia much lighter in complexion. Now, the color of the people in this region varies from brown to yellow. The Greek and Roman invasions also made these Middle Eastern people lighter. Another fact that we should not forget is that the Moors and Arabs of North Africa captured and raped European women. As a result, North Africans became lighter. At one time, these peoples of North Africa and the Middle East were all black. Whites have mixed their blood with blacks from Asia, Africa, and the Western Hemisphere. Despite this, the colored people of the world control approximately 3/4 of the Earth's geographic surface. Because the colored people of the world are in the majority, it is appropriate to infer that whites have always been a minority, and that black people are the original people of the humanity. It is interesting and significant to know that the Japhites, Europeans, traveled to the northwest, north and northeast of the Caucasus mountain region to Europe. It gives the impression that the Japhites were isolated, or that they isolated themselves from the civilization and nation of Nimrod, which began in the land of Mesopotamia. When the Japhites separated at the Tower of Babel, the theory and probability is that they turned white. There are many instances of individuals turning white in Jewish biblical history. When God wanted to show Moses a miracle, he turned his hand white as snow, then he turned it back to its original color, black. In ancient Israel, when a man had a white spot on his skin, or white or yellow hair, or slightly reddish white skin, he was declared unclean. All people who were victims of this shameful disease were isolated outside the camp or city. Those who had leprosy were called lepers and had to cry out, "Unclean, unclean." All people in the ancient world who had yellow hair and leprosy were despised and ostracized. This is one of the reasons why white supremacists discriminate against black people today. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses and defamed his character because he married an Ethiopian woman. As punishment, God struck Miriam with leprosy and she became white as snow. Now, many people have been deluded into thinking that Miriam and Aaron spoke against her because she was a black woman, but that is not the case, because Miriam, Aaron, and Moses were all black. They spoke against Moses because the Ethiopian woman was of a different religion. The color issue did not exist in their day. To prove this point, the Israelites lived among the Hamites, Canaanites, Hittites, Anians, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. They started it. All the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served Baalim, the idol god. Because they served the idol Baalim, the god of Israel became angry and sold them into slavery. It was idol worship, not marriages, that God disapproved of. Marriages were forbidden because God feared that foreign races would persuade the Israelites to worship their idols, but in Moses' case, he had converted the Ethiopian woman to his religion. Miriam and Aaron used the Ethiopian woman as an excuse to challenge Moses' authority. It was a jealous family feud between the three. Moreover, Miriam and Aaron were older than Moses. They said, "Has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?" And the Lord listened to them. In another case of leprosy, God showed Moses some miracles so that he could show them to the children of Israel, so that they would believe that Moses was sent from God. In this case, Moses' hand turned white. Naaman and Gehazi both had leprosy. The scripture is a summary of this story. Naaman was the captain of the Syrian army, and he contracted leprosy, boils and whitening of the skin. He wanted to be cured. Then he heard about the prophet Elisha. Elisha told him to dip 7 limes in the Jordan River. Naaman obeyed and was cured. Elisha was offered a reward, but he refused it. A servant of Elisha, named Gehazi, wanted the reward which his master, Elisha, refused. So Gehazi ran to find Naaman. When he found him, he asked for the reward and told him that his master had trusted him. Of course, this was a lie. When Gehazi returned to Elisha, Elisha said, "I know that you have obtained garments, olive trees, and all kinds of riches by subterfuge. Therefore, the leprosy that Naaman had I will leave to you and to your descendants forever, and he sent away from his presence a leper, white as snow. This type of leprosy affected the reproductive organs, genes and chromosomes that determine hereditary characteristics in her body. This meant that all of her children would produce white offspring, even though at first there was a black man. This was the case with Gehazi. Chapter 3. Afro-Asian culture reaches Europe. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and Ethiopians were black people. They contributed much to the advancement of civilization. Because they studied astrology, they were able to formulate many principles of astronomy. These blacks were so shrewd and clever that they were able to divide the years into months, weeks, hours, minutes, and seconds. In mathematics, they developed the decimal system. The most famous of the Babylonian kings was Hammurabi, who ruled around 2150 BC. He was noted for codifying a system of laws based on retaliation as a punitive measure for crime. He also established a 7-day week, with the last day as a day of rest or Sabbath. This idea was adopted by the Hebrews and then transmitted to the Greeks, Romans, and other Europeans. The literature of the Babylonians is truly interesting. Long ago, this black people wrote with a sharp instrument on clay tablets. Thousands of these tablets have been found, and some of them reveal a popular work known as the Enuma Elish, or the Epic of Creation. The story of how the world began comes from the Babylonians. After the dispersion of mankind at the Tower of Babel, the Black Hamites migrated east, south, southwest, and west. These Black Hamites settled in the land of Canaan, later called Israel. The land of Canaan is named after Ham's youngest son, who was Canaan. The Canaanites were the primordial aborigines of the land of Canaan. We can call them Africans because of their blood relationship with the other inhabitants of the African continent. There were 11 Canaanite tribes living in and around the land of Canaan before the black Israelites took possession of it. The greatest cultural and commercial cities of these black Canaanites were Tyre and Sidon, sometimes spelled Sidon. This city is named after Sidon, the firstborn of Canaan. The Sidonians and the Canaanites were of the same race, and their kings ruled over these two cities. In many history books you will read about the Sidonians under the name of Phoenicia. The Greeks called the Sidonians Phoenicians, land of the palm, because they found many palm trees there, but the Sidonians called their nation by the name of Canaan. Phoenicia, or the land of the Sidonians, was situated north of Palestine, along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, bounded by that sea on the west, and by the mountain ranges of Lebanon on the east. Tyre and Sidon were founded around 2300 BC. The Tel El Amarna tablets show that Tyre was a place of great strength in the 15th century BC. Sidon was even older. For a long time it was the only black Phoenician city known to the Greeks. Even after Tyre assumed the leadership, the Greeks and Hebrews spoke of the Phoenicians as Sidonians, and King Lebal of Tyre is called the king of the Sidonians. These black people mastered philosophy, astronomy, geometry, arithmetic, and navigation. They had good ports, which allowed them to sail to distant lands such as Cyprus, Sardinia, Crete, Rhodes, Cardi, in Spain, Sicily, Carthage, in North Africa, near Tunisia, Tangier, Offa, and the Canary Islands. These Phoenicians were also experts in metalworking, sewing, and embroidery. They extracted dye from the shellfish that abounded in the adjacent waters. This dye later became known as Tyrian purple. They made glass from the white sand of the Mediterranean coast. The Phoenicians spoke a Semitic, Hamitic language, so close to Hebrew, that Phoenician and Hebrew, although with different dialects, can be considered practically as the same language. As stated above, there were 11 Canaanite tribes: Sidonians, Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Sergasites, Hivites, Akites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, the Hamathites. Hebrew has its origin in the Canaanite language. When Abraham journeyed from the region of Babylon towards the land of Canaan, he found the Canaanite language similar to his own language. Abraham communicated very well with the inhabitants of the new land, adopted the Canaanite language, made certain modifications to it, and it became known as Hebrew. The Hebrew language was very similar to the Canaanite, says the Bible Dictionary. Phoenician or Canaanite can be classified as an African language because the Canaanites were blood brothers of the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Nubians, Sudanese, and other Africans. The Phoenicians established a colony in North Africa called Carthage, and they, the Carthaginians, always considered themselves Canaanites. When Moses led the black Israelites out of Egypt, North Africa, Moses died in the wilderness. Then Joshua led the Israelites into the land of Canaan and dispossessed the Canaanites. Now, it is written in a Jewish book called the Babylonian Talmud, for when the Africans came to plead against the Jews before Alexander of Macedon, they said that Canaan belongs to us, as it is written, the land of Canaan with its coast, and Canaan was the ancestor of this people, us. These Canaanites or Africans were expelled from the land of Canaan by Joshua. Around 332 BC, Alexander conquered Palestine. As stated above, Africans came to Alexander claiming that the land of Canaan belonged to them. The point I want to elucidate is that these Canaanites considered themselves Africans. Consequently, we can correctly say that the Hebrew-Canadian language is one of the African languages. Many of the private houses in these black villages were equipped with cisterns to store water. The wealth of Phoenicia, or Carthage, was based on clandestine technical manufacturing processes, secret mines of expensive and advantageous metals, secret trading posts hidden in remote areas from Ethiopia to the Pillars of Hercules. Their knowledge of navigation enabled them to navigate the British Isles and the Arctic Ocean. The English alphabet was derived from two ancient black nations, the Canaanite Phoenician alphabet and the Hebrew. The Phoenicians had a powerful navy, they were a great trading people. When the Phoenicians traded with the Greeks did not have an alphabet. Therefore, they adopted the Phoenician alphabet to conduct their business. The Greeks passed this alphabet on to the Romans, and the Romans passed it on to the Anglo-Saxon tribes. They then brought it to the British Isles. The first two letters of the Phoenician and Hebrew alphabets are Aleph and Bet, which is similar to the world alphabet. The Phoenician blacks also gave a system of weights and measures to the Europeans. The city of Carthage was called the Queen of the Sea. The Carthaginians controlled trade in the Mediterranean Sea. A new nation emerged on the peninsula of Italy, Rome, which challenged Carthage's commercial interest and supremacy in the Mediterranean. This state of hostility led to three long wars called the Punic Wars. The First Punic War took place between 261 and 241 BC, mostly naval battles which Italy won. The Second Punic War was fought between 218 and 201 BC. A black general named Hannibal was the extraordinary figure who did what was thought impossible by crossing the Alps with elephants. In Italy, he defeated the Romans. He was very resourceful and cunning. When he got into a difficult situation at one point, he brought down the Romans in droves of rattlesnakes. His unexpected victories astonished and terrified the city of Rome. But in the end, due to lack of nuns and supplies, he had to return to Africa, Carthage. The Third Punic War was in the years 149 and 146 BC and was fought in Africa. Because of Hannibal's skill in warfare, his strategy is taught in military schools throughout the world. The Egyptians. The Egyptians are Africans and descendants of the Hamlites. The first Egyptian was called Me'aim. According to the Hebrews, Me'aim was the son of Ham, Genesis 10 verse 5. Ancient and modern scholars have established the location of Me'aim to be Egypt. The word Me'aim is a plural form, meaning Upper and Lower Egypt. Some 3,300 years before the Christian era, Egypt was divided into two kingdoms. A great black pharaoh, king, named Menz united these two kingdoms by conquest. Later pharaohs wore a dynastic insignia on their crowns, the serpent of Lower Egypt and the falcon of Upper Egypt, representing the time when Egypt was divided. Subsequent pharaohs had the title, King of Upper and Lower Egypt. After the union of Egypt, their navy went out into the Mediterranean and traded with the inhabitants of coastal cities and islands such as Crete and Cyprus. Thousands of years ago, the Egyptians established powerful governments and built empires that stretched in all directions. They even dominated their Canaanite brethren in Palestine for a long period of time. These black Egyptians were proficient in mathematics, medicine, engineering, and agriculture. They used geometry to remeasure the land each year after the Nile River flooded. Pythagoras, the Greek mathematician, learned mathematics from the black Egyptians. The word algebra came from the Arabic word and means the science of equations. When the black Moors conquered Spain and Portugal, they brought algebra to Europe. And Mizraim begot Judim, and Ananim, and Ichabim, and Naphtuhim, and Pathrusi, and Casluhim, from whom came Philistim, Philistines, and Caphtorim. When Mizraim begot his sons, they dwelt in Egypt, except the Caphtorim and the Philistines, who dwelt in the island of Crete, in the Mediterranean Sea. In ancient times, not only the peoples of Ami and Africa were black, but also the peoples and lands of southern Europe on the Mediterranean Sea. The black races that controlled trade and established colonies in the Mediterranean were the Phoenicians and the Philistines. Herbert Wendt, in his book, It Began at Babel, says that Crete was a dominant power during and until the 2nd century BC. This Cretan power could not have been other than part of the Phoenician, Carthaginian Empire, because the city of Carthage did not fall until 146 BC. Where did European civilization and culture begin? Scholars say that it came from Africa and Asia via Crete. Researchers consider Crete to be the cradle of European culture. There are many myths surrounding the island of Crete. One is, it was in Crete that Zeus, father of the gods, abducted the Phoenician princess Europa and there fathered 3 sons on her. Zeus came in the form of a white bull and abducted a black princess, because the Phoenicians were a black people. Some scholars believe that before the Indo-European penetration into southern Europe and Asia, Greece was called Europa. Most likely, some Cretans settled in Crete. Herbert Wendt says that the name Europe is derived from the Semitic word Ereb. He says that the ancient Asians regarded the word Ereb as something dark, ignorant and mysterious, and therefore Europe 50 was the dark part of the earth. A social cataclysm, earthquake, devastated the island of Crete. These black Philistines emigrated from Caphtora, Crete, to the land of Canaan and settled on the southern coast of Palestine. The land of Palestine gets its name from the Philistines who inhabited that region. Chapter 4. The original black Jews. Originally all Hamites and Shemites, or Semites, were black. Abraham was a black Shemite and a descendant of Slicin. Abraham's name was Abram before he was called Abraham. The 3 Hebrew patriarchs were Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This Jacob fathered 12 sons, who later fathered the 12 tribes of Israel. Abraham was the father not only of the Hebrew Israeli nation, but also of the Arab nation. Now the mother and grandmother of the Arab nation were black Egyptian Elamite women, and the fathers of the Arab nation were Abraham and Ishmael, black Shemites. At one point, there was a grudge between Sarah, Abraham's wife, and Hagar, Sarah's servant, so Hagar ran away from Abraham's house and lived in the wilderness. Josephus, the Jewish historian, wrote that Ishmael married an Egyptian woman. As a result, he fathered 12 sons, Nebaioth, Kedar, Adsel, Mibsam, Mispmar, Dumali, Massa, Hadar, Tania, Jetta, Naphish, and Kedma. These 12 sons became 12 tribes and inhabited the region from the Euphrates to the Red Sea in the Arabian Peninsula. This country is known today as Arabia. For those who do not believe that the ancient Arabs were black, I would like to make one point very clear. If your mother and grandmother were black, I'm sure you would have many colored features. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the 12 tribes of Israel were all black. I will demonstrate this by a gradual method. After Joseph was sold into Egypt as a slave, we find in the 42nd chapter of Genesis that he became the viceroy of Egypt. Joseph's 10 brothers went into Egypt, Egypt is in Africa, to buy corn because there was famine in the land. All the newcomers to Egypt had to buy corn from Joseph, but when Joseph's 10 brothers got to Africa they did not recognize him. They did not recognize him because Joseph had grown up and the Egyptians were a black people like Jacob's sons. Jacob's 10 sons regarded Joseph as just another black Egyptian. We know this to be true because the 10 brothers returned and reported to their father, the man who is Lord of the land spoke harshly to us. Furthermore, if Joseph had been white he would have aroused the curiosity of his brothers very quickly. We really do not need any further proof that the Israelites were black, but for the sake of argument we will offer it. In many places in the Bible we find that the sons of Jacob and later Israelites took black Canaanite women as wives. If the ancient Israelites were not originally black, they would become so after mixing with black Canaanite men and women. When the king, Pharaoh, of Egypt issued an edict to throw all Hebrew baby boys into the Nile River, Miriam and her mother hid baby Moses in a basket by the river. Meanwhile, Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to wash and saw the basket and the baby, Moses. Pharaoh's daughter knew that the baby was Hebrew and adopted him. If Moses had been a white baby, it would have been difficult to hide him from her father's wrath. In the time of Moses, black Egyptians enslaved black Jews. Another point that proves that the Jews were black is the laws on leprosy, written in chapter 13 of Leviticus and explained in the second chapter of this book. The strangest and most surprising phenomenon of biblical leprosy was that the skin turned white. These laws on leprosy were given to the nation of Israel and could not be applied to a white nation. Herbert Wendt wrote in his book, "It began at Babel." All indications point to Asia being the cradle of the Negro race. It is written in the book of Daniel 7 verse 9, "I beheld until the thrones were thrown down, and the Ancient of Days sat, his clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was like a flame of fire, and its wheels like burning fire." The meaning of this verse is this: I beheld till the thrones were thrown down. The thrones were set up, and the Ancient of Days Saturday. The God of the universe is the Ancient of Days who sat on the throne. And the hair of his head was like pure wool. Daniel saw an anthropomorphic form of God judging the nations in the appearance of a venerable man with woolly hair like a Negro. Daniel the prophet and the people around him, the Babylonians, must have had woolly hair for him to dream that God had woolly hair. Many Israelites in biblical times intermarried with Canaanite Hantite tribes, and if the Jews were not black, the Israelites certainly became much darker after the intermarriage. Summary: there is more than enough evidence to show that all the original Israelites were black, including the surrounding Middle Eastern nations. We must consider the evidence that the Dravidians were the original black people of India, that the Cushites, Ethiopians, inhabited southern Mesopotamia, that Abraham and Israel intermarried with African, Egyptian, women, that the Canaanites belonged to the African family of nations, that ancient Israel intermarried with these black Canaanite tribes. At the time that Joseph was viceroy of Egypt, his brothers could not distinguish him from the black Egyptians because Joseph was black. After Pharaoh issued the cruel decree of extirpation of the Hebrew males, only a black Moses would have been able to effectively conceal himself for some time among the black Egyptians, that Daniel had a dream of an anthropomorphic god with woolly hair, that the biblical laws on leprosy of the time could only apply to a very dark people with black hair. The black Jews of India, Abyssinia, Ethiopia, and West Africa consider themselves the original Jews because of the purity of their Israelite blood, so Alan H. Godby has stated. We now know that Asia was the cradle of the black race. How did these people in Asia become lighter-skinned? There are 5 answers to this question: the Indo-European or Germanic invasion of Asia, the Greek invasion of the Middle East, the Roman invasion of the Middle East and North Africa, the Jewish slave trade, and the Arab slave trade. Indo-European invaders penetrated the Middle East and mixed with Asian blacks as far as India during the 2nd millennium BC. European Scythians passed through southern Russia and Central Asia to the borders of China. During the Greek and Roman invasions, their soldiers settled in the Middle East and North Africa to spread Greek and Roman culture. They also married black women. Jews sold white slaves to Arabs throughout Africa and Asia. When the black Moors of North Africa conquered Portugal and Spain, they transported thousands of white slaves of Germanic descent to Africa. All of these whites who arrived or were taken to Africa and Asia were absorbed into the native population. Black Arabs, black Jews, and Ethiopians. Arabia, the land of the descendants of Ishmael, son of Abraham, is bordered to the east by the Indian Ocean, to the northeast by the Persian Gulf, to the north by the Arabian Desert, and to the west by the Red Sea. The most fertile regions of this peninsula are the south and southwest. At one point it almost reaches Ethiopia, which is in Africa. There were many Cushite tribes, Ethiopians, living in the northern, western, and southern sections of Arabia. The Arabs have had a long history of intercourse with the Ethiopians in the Arabian Peninsula and with the Ethiopians across the Red Sea on the African continent. James Bruce, author of Travels to Discover the Source of the Nile, says that the inhabitants of Yemen, Arabia, particularly those on the coast opposite Saba, Sheba, were reputed to be Abyssinians, Ethiopians, from the earliest times until after the Muslim conquest. Many of the Arabs are not black today because of interbreeding as slaves in their homes and harems. It is a known fact that there were Ethiopians inhabiting Arabia in the north, southwest, and southeast. Why did these Ethiopians take up residence in southwest Arabia? Since the Ethiopians lived around the Persian Gulf in northern Arabia, it is very likely that they migrated to the southeast and southwest. It is obvious that the Cushites inhabited vital parts of Arabia before the birth of the progenitors of the Arabs. Rama, son of Cush, was the father of the Cushites Sheba and Dedan, Genesis 10:7, about 2300 BC. The tribe of Rama became notably commercial, Ezekiel 27 verse 22. The descendants of Rama lived in southeast Arabia, and the descendants of Havilah resided in southwest Arabia, which is Yemen. This Havilah was a son of Cush. Furthermore, Cush was the patriarch of all the Ethiopian tribes in Babylon, Arabia, India, and on the Nile River. The Cushites were residents of Arabia shortly after the confusion of the languages at Babylon, 2247 BC. But Ishmael, the father of the Arabs, was not until 1890 BC. My conclusion is that the Ethiopians were in Arabia before the Arabs. In the year 1012 BC, an Ethiopian queen named Bilqis visited King Solomon in Jerusalem. Bilqis came from the kingdom of Sheba in southern Arabia. Sheba was part of the Ethiopian Empire. This empire included Upper Egypt, Ethiopia, and parts of Arabia, which included the kingdom of Sheba. The Jewish historian, Elavius Josephus, calls this queen the Queen of Egypt and Ethiopia. Calling this queen the Queen of Ethiopia is appropriate when one knows the historical background and genealogy of the early inhabitants of Arabia. The Queen of Sheba is also known as the Queen of the South. The Kingdom of Sheba and Ethiopia was an empire south of the land of Israel. We must remember that on the map, Yemen, Arabia almost touches Ethiopia in Africa. It is obvious that the Queen of Sheba had more than one name, because the Ethiopians know her by the name of Makda. However, it is not strange that she had more than one name. The Ethiopian story of Makeda, the Queen of Sheba, has been transmitted to us from the Abyssinian archives. This important document is known as the Kebra Nagast, or Honor of the Kings. The Ethiopian account relates the itinerary of the Ethiopian queen to meet King Solomon in Jerusalem. She arrived with a large train, a retinue of officials, servants, and abundant riches. While in Jerusalem, she became infatuated with King Solomon for the organization of his affairs, his wealth, his wisdom, his understanding, and his physical appearance. Furthermore, the story goes that King Solomon had a son with the Queen of Ethiopia. This child was named David or Menelik. The queen returned to Sheba with Menelik. After Menelik had remained in Ethiopia for some years, his mother sent him to King Solomon to be educated. Menelik was crowned king of Ethiopia at Jerusalem, and at that time he accepted the name of David. Many experts in the law of Moses, especially one from each tribe, accompanied him to Ethiopia to be judges in his kingdom. From these experts the present umbas, or chief judges, 3 of whom always administer to the king, are said to be descended. In company with this retinue came also Azariah, son of Zadok, the former high priest, and brought with him a Hebrew transcription of the law. The present Falashas, the black Jews of Ethiopia, claim descent from those Jews who returned from Jerusalem with Solomon's son Menelik. Moreover, the present emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, claims descent from King Solomon, the Queen of Sheba, and Menelik. The Queen of Sheba died about 986 BC, after reigning for 40 years. Menelik I ascended the throne, and his posterity, say the Ethiopian documents, have reigned ever since. James Bruce, the English explorer, says, this is no new doctrine. It has been tenaciously and continuously maintained from the earliest records of the period when all Ethiopia was Jewish, then, in later years, afterward Christianity. Moreover, says James Bruce, all the adjacent nations agree with the Ethiopian account, whether adversaries or friends, so far as the Queen of Sheba is concerned. They only differ in the name of having embraced the of the Queen. This writer also says, all the inhabitants of the coast of Arabia Felix were known as Ethiopians from the earliest times until after the Islamic conquest. This people were subjects of the Queen of Ethiopia. They were pagans, then converted to Judaism at the time of the building of the first temple, and were Jews from that time until 622 BC. As tradition says, when they were converted to Mohammedans by the sword of Muhammad. Before the introduction of the 3 influential religions in Arabia, Judaism, Christianity, and Mohammedanism. The Arabs worshipped stars, idols, and the stone of the Kaaba. I will write about the history of the Jews in Arabia. Next, I will write about the Christians in Arabia, and finally, I will write about the Mohammedans who emerged in the 7th century after Christ. Thousands of Jews emigrated to Egypt and Arabia when the Roman general Titus destroyed the city of Jerusalem in 70 AD. When the Jews revolted in 130 AD, the Emperor Hadrian sent General Julius Severus to Palestine to suppress the revolt. The persecution and restrictions imposed on the Jews were so great that a large number of Jews fled to Arabia. The tradition of the colored Yemenite Jews of Arabia tells that the first Jews arrived in Arabia with the prophet Jeremiah, just before Nebuchadnezzar destroyed the first temple. When considering the Jews of Arabia, we cannot forget the Jews who accompanied the Queen of Sheba and her son, Menelik I. It is obvious from many indications that the Queen of Sheba or her son, Menelik, moved their capital from Sheba to Ethiopia in Africa, or that they had a second capital in Aksum, Ethiopia, on the orders of a residence of great importance. It is not known exactly when the capital was transferred or when Aksum became important as a Jewish state, but it probably occurred between 990 and 575 BC. At the latter date the Persians conquered Arabia, which led to the immigration of more Sarbacans and Habashitans, Abyssinians, to Ethiopia. Many of the leaders and inhabitants of this Aksumite state became Jews and took political control of ancient Ethiopia, called Aksum. The Aksumite Empire was ruled by Himyarite immigrants from Arabia in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. According to tradition, the religious center contained the Ark of the Covenant brought from Jerusalem by the descendants of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Basil Davidson said that the great period of Ethiopia began shortly after 50 AD, when Aksum became the capital of a new line of kings. It is obvious that these kings were Jews. The successful trade monopoly in ancient times, on both sides of the Red Sea, between Africa and Arabia, meant political and military control of key ports. This is why Ethiopia and southern Arabia were subsumed into one empire. There was much trade rivalry between Saba, Himyar, Habsh and Aksum which led to many wars. All the kings and many of the inhabitants of these cities were Jews at one time. Professor Godby says that it is a salient point of tradition going back to the time of Solomon, for both Abyssinia and Yemen, that the ancient Hebrew kings on both sides of the Red Sea had the title of Bar Negash, or Kings of the Sea. The later Himyarite kings, after 250 BC, controlled both sides of the Red Sea. When the prosperous Himyarite kings changed religion, they attached the pretext of religious extremism to the reasons for making war on their trading rivals. The kings of Raidan and Himyar united against Habsh, Saba, and Hadramaut around 500 BC. The rivalries between these alliances caused the Roman fleet to move militarily into the Arabian Gulf around 1 BC to capture the port of Aden. When Roman power declined, there were Jewish kings in Hadramaut, Saba, and Yemen who continued economic rivalries in trade. During the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th centuries, Judaism was politically powerful in Arabia. This power was based on commercial monopoly. There were many Jewish kings, Abu Kariba, Masruk, Dim Nuwas, etc. The most notable was Du Nuwas. He will be considered later. The genesis of Christianity in Ethiopia and Arabia. Around the year 329 AD, a group of Teneriffians, Phoenicians, set sail for India. Their ship met with disaster on the coast of Ethiopia, and the only survivors were the leader's 2 sons. These boys were captured by the Ethiopians and taken to the king's court. Frumentius, one of the boys, became the instructor of Abraha, the prince. Abraham later became king of Ethiopia. Erementius taught Christianity to the crown prince Abraham and others. Erementius traveled to the Byzantine Empire, Eastern Roman Empire. He had an audience with the temporal ruler, Constantine the Great, and the ecclesiastical ruler, Saint Athanasius. The leaders of the empire were so impressed with his abilities that they helped him. Frumentius was promoted to bishop and headed to Ethiopia. The bishop erected and established a church in Ethiopia with the support of the new king, Abraha. Through Abraham's confession of Christianity, he became a Jewish Christian. He was eager to spread his new faith in the land of his ancestors, the Arabian Peninsula. Gathering a military expedition of Ethiopians, Abraham crossed the Red Sea with his naval forces and army. He defeated the Black Arabs and conquered the pagan city of Mecca after a long siege. After introducing Christianity to Arabia, Abraham returned to his capital at Aksum, Ethiopia. By the beginning of the 6th century AD, Jewish power in Yemen had reached its zenith. This power was dominant in Yathrib, later called Medina. This was the time of the golden age of the black Jews in Yemen, which was never again achieved. These business magnates maintained international trade in a multitude of commodities with both East and West, and Arab converts to Judaism intermarried with the original Jews. Du-Nuwas was one of these Arab converts to Judaism. He was the king of Yemen around 500 AD. Jewish scholars were invited to teach Judaism to the general people. When Du-Nuwas heard that Jews were being persecuted in the Byzantine Empire, he retaliated by killing some Byzantine merchants and 20,000 Christians in Arabia. This reckless act led to the downfall of the Jewish king. Judaism was not meant to be spread in such a way. Not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord. The Christians, in their terrible hour of desperation, made a fervent appeal to the emperor of the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople, but Justinian was hesitant to mobilize a military force because of previous Roman defeats in Arabia. The emperor was advised by the Abu Yuna, patriarch of the Coptic Church of Alexandria, Egypt, to appeal to Saint Elesban, the emperor of Ethiopia. Saint Elesban received the envoys and promised to help the Christians of Yemen. Saint Elesban organized and mobilized an army of over 65,000 Africans. He appointed one of his most astute generals, Abraham, to be their commander. Abraham sailed across the Red Sea with 150 ships and a large company of elephants. When the two opposing forces met, the Jews were defeated, and the triumphant Ethiopians marched onto Jaffa and captured it. The Ethiopians then ruled Arabia with an iron fist. Abraha the Ethiopian built a wonderful temple at Sani to attract the pilgrims, pagan Arabs, who passed through this conquered country on their way to the temple at Mecca. Moreover, Abraham devised extravagant and additional inducements to entice the Arabs away from Mecca. One of the Arabs considered Abraham's actions to be an affront to his religion. As a result, he placed dung on the altar in Abraham's temple. Abraham's reactions were immediate and energetic in the face of the sacrilege of this pagan Arab. Abraham equipped an army of 41,000 men, horsemen, and armored elephants and marched to Mecca to destroy the temple. Before Abraham reached Mecca, his army was battered by a sandstorm. In addition, smallpox took hold of his forces. Despite these difficulties, the general reached Mecca with sufficient forces to intimidate the inhabitants of the city. They capitulated and opened the city gates. As Abraham rode through the arch of the city gates, his white elephant stood still and refused to move. The Arabs rejoiced at this. Recognizing an act of God, they violently attacked the Ethiopians and transformed the history of the world. Abraham left Mecca and died of smallpox and mortification. Because of the stubbornness of Abraham's elephant, the Arabs have called this period the Age of the Elephant, and only the birth of Muhammad is considered more important. Shortly after this event, Muhammad ibn Abdullah was born, in the year 570. He changed the religion of the entire Arabian Peninsula before he died. The birth of Islam. At the time of Muhammad's birth, what were the international events or conditions operating? The answer to this question is necessary to understand the rapid rise of the Mohammedan Empire. The Roman Empire, at the time of Muhammad's birth, was divided into two parts, the Western Empire with its capital in Rome and the Byzantine Empire with its capital in Constantinople. The Western Roman Empire collapsed in 476 AD, after numerous barbarian raids and attacks. Germanic tribes crossed the borders and penetrated the entire territory of the Western Empire, including Africa. The Eastern Empire was deprived of its vigor by repeated wars with Parthia, Persia. This empire could not hold its possessions with a firm grip. The constant imposition of heavy taxes, a shortage of soldiers and agricultural workers, economic exhaustion, a large slave class, and the influx of barbarians with frequent wars brought disorder and weakened both the Western and Eastern empires. With the defeat of Jewish and Christian power in Arabia, the stage was set for the emergence of a new power on the world scene. This new power was Arabia. The Arab Empire, with its new religion, Islam, established the superstructure of its culture on the ruins of the Roman Empire in the Middle East, Africa, and parts of Europe. Europe lay dormant and inactive for 1,000 years, through the Dark Ages, while the Muslim Empire dominated the progressive civilized world. Let us now return to examine the rise of the Muslim religion and empire in Arabia. When Muhammad was born, many Arabs still believed in the sun, stars, spirits, and idols. The Arabs possessed 360 idols, one for each day of the year. Muhammad was born in 570, 4 years after the death of Emperor Justinian, and was descended from the tribe of Quraysh and the family of Hashim. He had a prodigious mind. In his youth he was never taught to read or write, but his imagination was superlative. Muhammad was an extraordinarily handsome man and eloquent in motivating men with the power of words. In the early years of Muhammad's life, he spent his time as a shepherd boy. We must remember that many successful men have emerged from humble and insignificant conditions. Observing the sun by day and the stars by night gave Muhammad the opportunity to contemplate in solitude and reflect on the events and depths of this world. After becoming a camel driver, Muhammad traveled to remote and intriguing lands and led his caravans to Persia, Syria, and Egypt, doing business with merchants of all kinds. On his business trips, he met Jews, Christians, and members of other sects. He questioned them about the tenets of their religions. He frequented the circles of Jews and their rabbis, especially since they were merchants and an omnipresent ethnic group. Since he could neither read nor write, his ears were attentive and keen to everything the Jews told him. Muhammad learned much from the Jewish religion, and combined it with his new religion, Islam. When Khadija Ali, a rich widow, heard of Muhammad's good reputation, she employed him in her business. He went to transact business, transacted it successfully, and returned home at an advantageous time. Muhammad was struck by Khadija's beauty. He had not seen her before because he had received his office by delegation. Khadija was immensely gratified by the way he conducted his affairs, and by the way he presented himself to her. Muhammad was not a tall man, but he had such broad shoulders that he looked like a giant. Muhammad had curly, woolly black hair that made him look excellent. Finally, Muhammad married Khadija, the rich woman of the city of Mecca, when he was about 40 years old. The first stage of the Islamic Revolution. According to Alvin L. Bertrand, most mass movements go through 4 stages or phases to complete a full cycle, but Eric Hoffer, the longshoreman, postulates 3 stages: the vocal stage, the fanatic stage, and the stage of practical men of action. Muhammad spent many days in the hills outside Mecca. He was deeply immersed in the deplorable conditions of his people and wanted to lead them away from moral baseness and idolatry. He seemed to see the angel Gabriel appearing to him, charging him to articulate a new religion to replace the old one. Incidentally, Gabriel was the same angel who appeared in a vision to the Hebrew prophet Daniel. Muhammad gradually came to believe that he was a prophet, and he expounded his religion to members of his family. He went out into the holy temple to preach to the crowds, who gathered to worship idols. With these words began the first phase of the Islamic Revolution: La ilaha illa Allah, Muhammad Rasul Allah. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the Prophet of Allah. By the way, at this time the Hebrew Old Testament had been translated into Arabic, and the Arabs were delighted to read about their great ancestors in the history of the Hebrew patriarchs. This fact alone helped Muhammad to inspire in the Arabs the feeling of nationalism and racial pride, because they had read in the Hebrew scriptures that Ishmael was to become a great nation. Muhammad organized the first stage of his revolution by undermining and discrediting established beliefs and customs, and by questioning other political, social, and religious institutions. Muhammad attacked the prostitutes and rulers of Mecca who were using Ishmael's well and the Kaaba temple for financial gain. He spoke out not only against idolatry, but also against gambling and drunkenness. Because he spoke out against the wine businesses in the city of Taif, Muhammad was forced to leave the city. When Muhammad returned to the city of Mecca, opposition against him intensified. A law was passed stating that anyone who accepted Islam would be banished. When the leaders of the city of Mecca were informed that Muhammad was gaining converts in Yathrib, they plotted to assassinate him. This conspiracy motivated Muhammad to flee from Mecca to Yathrib. On the night of Muhammad's flight to Yathrib, later called Medina, the city of the prophet, it is known as the Hejra, the flight. The Muslim calendar begins with the year of the Hejra. It is the most important event in Islamic history. The Hejra took place when Muhammad was 53 years old. On reaching Yathrib, Muhammad found the inhabitants very hospitable to him and his new religion. There were two factors that contributed to this hospitality. There were many influential Jews in Yathrib who were allies of the other Arabs. These Jews had introduced the concept of one God. In addition, the Arabs were somewhat tolerant of the Jews. 2. On a pilgrimage to the Temple of Mecca, some of the best citizens of Yathrib had been converted thanks to the teachings of Muhammad when he lived in Mecca. Eventually, the pilgrims returned to Yathrib and spread their new religion. These converts were able to easily accept Islam because they were greatly influenced by the Jews' concept of the one God. Eventually, Muhammad proclaimed himself ruler of the city, and in his honor the name Yathrib was changed to Medina. Islam and Judaism. The Prophet Muhammad adopted many principles and laws of the Jewish religion. 43 First of all, the basic idea of monotheism, which is the belief in one God. The Jewish confession of the oneness of God is, Shema Israel Adonai Elohim Adonai Echad, Hear, O Israel, the Lord, our God, the Lord is one. The Mohammedan motto is the following, La ilaha illa Allah, Muhammad Rasul Allah, there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the Prophet of Allah. Muhammad also adopted the main details of the Jewish calendar, the Day of Atonement, the Sabbath, much of the Bible and the Midrash narratives, and many points of ritual law. Indeed, Jews pray 3 times a day facing the city of Jerusalem, and Muslims, true believers, pray 5 times a day facing the city of Mecca. Muhammad tried every means to convert the Jews to his new religion, but in vain. The Jews were inflexible and resisted change. The high regard the Prophet had for the Jews turned into enmity, and instead of allies, he considered them competitors. Muhammad needed the confirmation of influential Jews to validate his mission, as all upstarts need the backing of someone influential. Therefore, Muhammad turned against the Jews and became their executioner. The two daughters of Judaism. The daughters of Judaism are Christianity and Islam. Now history is repeating itself. The defenders of Christianity told the Jews, we accept your Bible, your morality and your monotheism. Only accept from us Jesus Christ, the great prophet, the Messiah, of whom all the prophets spoke in Scripture. Because the Jews refused, they were despised and hated. Muhammad tried to build his religion as close to the Jewish religion as possible. He favored the Jews by accepting many of their laws and traditions. When the Jews refused to convert, he ordered his followers to stop going to the holy city of Jerusalem to pray, but to go to the city of Mecca instead. He changed the Jewish Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement or Day of Fasting, which he had accepted, to the month of Ramadan. Muhammad changed the Jewish Sabbath to Friday. We have another parallel with Christianity. In the 4th century, the Church changed Saturday to Sunday and reorganized its calendar to separate Passover from Easter. Like Christianity, too, Muhammad included in his Bible, the Quran, accusations against Jews. However, the Quran glorifies many biblical personalities. In order to win the pagans over to the Church, Christianity adopted many barbarian customs and traditions. Similarly, Muhammad, in order to win the loyalty of the pagan Arabs, adopted many of their cherished customs. The stone of the Kaaba, an idol, was to be given great regard in the new religion. Also, the pagan temple of Mecca was to remain a sacred site. The second stage of the Islamic Revolution. The fanatical stage of most revolutions is a bestial, merciless, bloody, chaotic affair. Men's throats are cut from car to car. There is a lack of rationalization and extreme fanaticism sets in. That was the case with Muhammad. He had reached the point of no return. He became a religious extremist in order to give his people a better life on a rapid scale. Muhammad came to the conclusion that all means of persuasion had been exhausted. The period of patience had passed, and he was now determined to propagate his religion by the sword. For he said, I, the last of the prophets, have been sent with a sword. The sword is the key of heaven and hell. All who draw it in the name of faith will be rewarded. Muhammad became a martial prophet, and the pagans and obstinate Jews became his victims. In 627, the Battle of Fos took place. The Jewish tribes were defeated by the armies of Muhammad. 700 Jews were gathered in the marketplace and offered the alternative, the Quran or the sword. The devout Jews were accustomed to martyrdom. They did not hesitate in their choice. Muhammad carried out his bestial threat, executed the Jews and sold the women. There was another city northeast of Medina called Chaibar. This city was the seat of Jewish power in Arabia. After a long siege, the city capitulated to Muhammad. Under the rule of Omar, the Jews of Chaibar were transplanted to Syria. Muhammad attacked tribe after tribe and caravan after caravan heading towards the city of Mecca. These acts enraged the Meccans and they equipped a large army to destroy Muhammad. In the ensuing battle, Muhammad was mostly killed. Finally, the Prophet gathered his forces and entered the city of Mecca. The entire city was abandoned because its inhabitants were afraid of Muhammad. Muhammad decimated the idols of Mecca. However, he did not demolish the temple. When the Meccans saw that Muhammad did not destroy their temple, they returned to the city and joined his religion. The third stage of every revolution is marked by the preservation and continuation of the new order. Muhammad's successor was Abu Bakr. He was called Caliph. Abu Bakr wrote down Muhammad's speeches and services. At this time, Islam had a tenacious hold on the lives of the Arabs. Chapter 5. Black Civilization in Africa. Before we embark on our journey into African civilization, I think it would be interesting for readers and students of African history to know how the continent of Africa got its name. First, in ancient times, the black Hebrews called Egypt, the guardian of the northeast gate of Africa, the land of Ham. Hebrew ethnologists used the homonymous name, Ham, because they were aware that many of Ham's descendants traveled south from Asia and inhabited the continent we know today as Africa. There appear to have been no Semites or Indo-Europeans in the land of Ham, Africa, prior to the enslavement of the Hebrews and the invasion of the Hyksos. Ancient Palestine was part of the land of Ham before the Hebrews arrived and drove out the Canaanite Hamites. It seems that the first anthropologists and ethnologists classified races according to cultural development and not according to kinship, but the Hebrews are an exception. The early Greeks distinguished between Hellenes and barbarians because they wanted their own people to appear superior. Some claim that they are the originals of everything. The advanced Romans felt culturally superior to the barbarian tribes to the north, and enslaved many of these barbarians. The Egyptians subjugated and sold other African tribes who were inferior to them in culture and conceived of themselves as racially and culturally superior to the more underdeveloped peoples. Greek scholars became interested in Negroes 600 years after the founding of Naucratis, a Greek colony in the Nile Delta. By 1 BC, the Greek historians Strain and Diodorus classified the Ethiopian races, black races from the interior of Africa. The Greeks received slaves from the Upper Nile and from the west of the Nile adjacent to the Ethiopian kingdom. Herbert Wench cites Aristotle as saying that the Pygmies came from the Upper Nile, which is Ethiopia. In much Greek literature, when referring to the African, the Greeks used the word Ethiopian. Furthermore, maps of Africa during the Middle Ages show this continent as Ethiopia. Knowing that most of Africa was called Ethiopia, the professor of theology and anthropology, Johann F. Mickenbay, classified the human species into 5 categories: Caucasian, Mongolian, American, Indian, Malay, and Ethiopian. Note that the father of modern anthropology does not use the term Negro, but Ethiopian. But the modern name of this continent is Africa. It is derived from the descendants of Abraham and Keturah. These descendants are Ophran, or Apha, and Afran. The black Jewish historian, Flavius Josephus, wrote the following: Ophran, the grandson of Abraham through Keturah, led a military expedition against Libya and captured it. When his grandchildren colonized that place, they called it, after his name, Africa. In the Latin language, the word for Africa is Apha, which is similar to Ophran, or Apha. The F in the word Apha and the Afro are interchangeable in many languages. In North Africa, the Romans won a military victory, the period of the Third Punic War. Apparently, the Romans borrowed the word Apha from the ancient Libyans, who called their country Apha. The African continent is a gigantic land mass. Its land area is almost 4 times larger than that of the United States. How and where did Africa receive its black population? Did it come from the south, the east, the north, the west, across the mighty oceans, or did this population originate in the interior of the continent through a gradual process of evolution? Herbert Wendt and Basil Davidson say that it presumably came from Mesopotamia, Babylon. The history of the ancient black Jews indicates that the first patriarchs of the African people emigrated from Babylon, but there is a proclivity among many scholars to overlook Jewish sources, due to prejudice, and to seek the solution in the mythologies of the nations. Much truth has been lost in the worship of many gods and in the building of many kings. Can we believe the Jewish records which record the ethnology and migrations of the ancestors of the Africans? I think so, because Abraham came from the district of Babylon, which was the cradle of civilization. Abraham had the oral traditions handed down from Noah and Slyam. Abraham paid homage to the one true God, so his descendants were able to pass on a long and unbroken religion, history, culture, and language. No other nation of the ancient Near East can boast or claim as much. Even as great as Egypt was, its ancient religion and language have become extinct. The Hamites began arriving in Africa from the Middle East between 5000 and 3500 BC. These Hamites were, according to the Hebrews, Miriam, Egypt, Phut, Somaliland and to the west, and Cush, Ethiopia. The Canaanite Phoenician Hamites did not colonize North Africa until the 9th century BC, when they established the city of Carthage in Tunisia. The Egyptians and their descendants are the Ludim, Anamim, Lahabim, Naphtuhim, Pathrusim, Kasluhim, Philistim, and the Caphtorim. The Naphtuhim settled in the Nile Delta, and Pathrusim is the city of Pathros in Upper Egypt. Anamim and Kasluhim also settled in various sections of Egypt. The Lahabim and Ludim occupied the territory west of Egypt now called Libya, and westward. The Caphtorim occupied the island of Crete in the Mediterranean Sea, and the Philistim eventually inhabited the low-lying coast of Palestine. When the Israelites under Joshua ben Nun invaded the land of Canaan, many of the Hanitic Canaanite tribes moved to North Africa. The Cushites inhabited eastern Africa along the coast and parts of the interior. More Ethiopians and Black Semites crossed the Red Sea from the southern tip of Arabia and traveled into the interior of Africa. The entire African continent was settled from the north and east. Mary Hastings Bradley, during her journey through Tanganyika, relates a story of the experienced Watusi of Rwanda. She says that they have an exact theology, an account of the creation of the world, and a tradition that they came down from the north. Also Herman Norden writes that the people of Uganda have a legend of having crossed the Nile centuries ago. Uganda is south of the Nile and east of the Congo. The third son of Ham is Phut, sometimes spelled Put. The descendants of Put have been found throughout the area below the Sahara Desert. They use the names Futa, Foul, Fulas, Powell, Poolbay, and Fulbe. These tribes have spread over the whole of Africa, from Somaliland to Senegal. Professor Kodbey says that they have prefixed their name to almost every district of any extent which they have occupied. They have Futatoro near Senegal, Fiitajalan and Futabondu in northern Sierra Leone. There is also Chulakasan, Futazora, Futa Fcraf, and Futadagu. Egypt, the land of the Nile. The most extraordinary civilization of antiquity, at the western end of the Fertile Crescent, was that of Egypt. What conditions contributed to the greatness of Egypt? The factors that made the eminence of these Negroes possible. Climatic conditions and geography were the main factors that influenced the development of Egyptian civilization. The conditions that played a great role in the development of Egyptian civilization were the Nile River, warm climate, an outlet to the Mediterranean Sea, and the Red Sea. Egypt is the Nile. A very peculiar fact about Egypt is that it gets little rain. The Nile River runs through this country for some 750 miles from the Ethiopian highlands, overflowing its banks once a year, during the summer solstice. As the Nile flows to the sea, the water brings down alluvial deposits of black soil, making the land arable on both sides of the Nile in the valley. The combination of fertile soil, the Nile as an irrigation canal, interacting with a warm climate, produced for Egypt enormous quantities of corn and grain, which helped feed a growing urban population and large armies. As a result of Egyptian prosperity, we find the ancient Hebrews going down to Egypt to buy corn. Social scientists know that in order to achieve military expansion, economic development is a prerequisite, and Egypt had solved this problem early in its development. The annual flooding of the Nile on its banks helped stimulate learning, especially in astronomy and geometry. The priests wanted to calculate the exact period of the flooding of the Nile. To do this, the priests had to observe the celestial bodies. To do this, they had to observe the celestial bodies and divide the year into 12 months of 30 days. Our current calendar is based on the Egyptian calendar. Once again, due to the overflow of the Nile, this event transformed the reference points of the owners. Real estate had to be remeasured and lines and angles drawn. This need led to the creation of geometry, which also became necessary in construction, engineering, and warfare. The Nile also played a crucial role as a source of communication and transportation to maintain the union of Upper and Lower Egypt as a single autonomous kingdom. The Olympic North could trade with the South, because the strong winds, during most of the year, could push the sailing ships against the currents. The concentration of population around the Nile was a phenomenon that encouraged shipbuilding and stimulated maritime trade with other nations in the Mediterranean Sea. It increased Egypt's naval forces eventually in the Red Sea, and with all the above factors operating for Egypt, it became a major power early in its development. The Ancient Kingdom. The history of dynasties in the Egyptian civilization can be divided into 3 periods. They are the following: the Old Kingdom or Age of the Pyramids, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom or New Empire. The first king of the first dynasty of the Old Kingdom was Menks. The date of his accession to the throne was around 3500 BC. He wore a unique double crown which symbolized the unity of Upper and Lower Egypt. The serpent was the symbol in the north and the falcon in the south. By the time of the Third Dynasty, Egypt was well on its way to greatness, 2980 to 2900 BC. The most notable king of this period was Sosa. With his power, wealth, and the help of his advisor, Imhotep, he promoted the city of Memphis, expanded and strengthened the kingdom, built tombs, temples, and terraced pyramids. During the reign of King Zoser, there lived in Egypt the most phenomenal intellectual of his time. This man was Imhotep, the teacher. He excelled in many scholarly pursuits and was preeminent in the field of medicine. J. A. Rogers says that he diagnosed and treated over 200 different diseases of the human body. The Egyptians practiced auscultation, listening to body sounds, surgery, chemistry, and the recognition of diseases by their characteristics. Imhotep examined the internal and external vital organs of the systemic human body. In addition, he investigated the circulatory system. Herodotus says that the Egyptians were specialists in the field of medicine and that the country was full of doctors. In his time, Imhotep was also recognized as a wise man, priest, philosopher, poet, scribe, magician, astronomer, and architect. Egyptian mythology. There were many gods in the Egyptian pantheon. The most famous gods were Osiris, Isis, and Horus. These gods formed a triad. The main gods were worshipped in a triad. The number 3 apparently had a mystical significance for the Egyptians. Horus was the son of the sun god, Osiris, and the moon goddess, Isis. The triad was very common in the ancient world and has survived to this day. Previously, Osiris was the god of the Nile and Isis represented the god of the earth. The Egyptians also worshipped animals, nature, and 12 gods. Hercules was one of these 12 gods. Herodotus, the Greek historian, says that the Greeks adopted the black god, Hercules, from the Egyptians. When the Greeks and Romans took over the gods from Asia and Africa, they sometimes changed their names and their color. Let us now return to our triad, Osiris, Isis, and Horus. I think that more than any other god, the legend of Osiris underwent a great transformation in the course of its history. At first, I am sure, he was a subsidiary god, but he was elevated to the status of a sun god. In Egyptian mythology, the legend says that Osiris was king of Egypt and married his sister Isis. When Osiris went off to war, his brother Set killed him. Set ended up cutting the body into 14 pieces and scattered it in a remote area. Isis, desperate, began to search for the fragments and found them except for the phallus, penis, which had been eaten by a Nile. She reassembled her dead husband's body by skillfully joining the pots together. She then performed the embalming rites, and this restored the body to eternal life. It was always considered in Egypt that the preservation of the intact body was necessary for the eternal life of the soul. Eventually, Isis gave birth to a son after her husband's death. This posthumous birth was conceived by union with the dead body of her husband, miraculously reanimated by his damages. This mythology recalls the spirit that entered the Virgin Mary, thus conceiving the infant Jesus. The goddess then retreated to the marsh of Buto, to escape the wrath of Set, who had usurped the throne, and to raise her son Horus until the day he was mature enough to avenge his father's death. According to another version, Set discovered that Isis had given birth to Horus. Set entered the marshes in the form of a snake and bit Horus, leaving him near death. Finally, Isis was told that evil and darkness would persist until Horus was cured. Many early Egyptian kings were deified, ritually identified in the solar hierarchy as sons of Ra. Ra remained the supreme god, and Osiris, Isis, and Horus, his son, were incorporated into Ra's family, the solar pantheon. Some of the pharaohs were considered in the solar religion as the incarnation of Horus the Elder, son of Ra, or the physical son of Ra himself. The connection of Osiris and Isis with fertility cults was constantly emphasized from the age of the empire, which favored their gradual entry into the realm of the living. Osiris became the leader of this world and the underworld, and his name, in hieroglyphics, from the 20th dynasty onwards was the sun disk instead of the eye. Inventions and legends of ancient Egyptian mythology are voluminous and interesting. They have their counterparts in the East and West, Babylon, Greece, and Rome. From Greece and Rome, culture and civilization spread throughout the continent. European. Now, to conclude the story of the ancient king, it behoves me to mention the fact that Khufu, the first king of the 4th Mkfita dynasty, erected the largest pyramid. Pipi, the third and greatest king of the 6th dynasty, 2590 and 2570, sent some expeditions against the Bedouins of Sinai and Palestine. However, Egypt was doomed to a period of decline. Pipi II reigned 90 years, 2566 and 2470 BC, the longest reign recorded in history, generally a period of uneventful decline, with the king controlled for much of the time by a powerful aristocracy. The Old Kingdom and the first 1,000 years of recorded history end with the 8th dynasty. This was the beginning of the period of excessive anarchy. The country was involved in a destructive civil war. There was a long and miserable period of disorder. Many potentates claimed the throne at once, and the cities were in an uproar with general confusion. At the same time, the Flametic Anians from north of the Euphrates River invaded the Fertile Crescent and the Egyptian frontier. These Asiatic Amorites also penetrated the flourishing cities of the Nile Delta, sowing confusion and panic. The Middle Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom consisted of 9 dynasties that lasted for a period of 1,000 years. Due to the condition of anarchy, the need of the hour was for strong leaders. This leadership was found in the 11th and 12th dynasties. Mentuhotep II completed the conquest of the Heracleopolitan dynasty. The capital of this kingdom was moved more than 300 miles south of Memphis to the city of Thebes. Obviously, the capital was moved to Thebes so that it would be less subject to attacks from the invading Asiatics. The powerful pharaohs again ruled over Upper and Lower Egypt. As the new kings restored law, order, and peace, the Egyptians devised further improvements and public works. Amenemhet III of the 12th dynasty, 1849 to 1801, and other pharaohs established dikes and built colossal reservoirs to conserve Nile water for irrigating the land. They dug a canal through the land between the Nile Delta and the Red Sea. The sophisticated Egyptians dug canals thousands of years before a French engineer, de Lesseps, dug the Suez Canal in 1869. The ancient Egyptians were meticulous masters of building engineering. They were very precise with the smallest details. Thousands of slaves from all over the known world were forced, under harsh regiment and strict rule, to build temples, monuments and pyramids for the megalomaniacal deified pharaohs. The 12th dynasty appeared on the international scene as a strongly organized monarchy. The kings maintained diplomatic relations with distant kingdoms. Sesostris III, the 5th king of the dynasty, 1887 to 1849 BC, conquered 200 miles of the Nile Valley up to the Second Cataract, established relations with the Red Sea coast, sent military expeditions to the Sinai Peninsula and also to Syria. At this time trade was successful on a large scale. During this Middle Kingdom, Egyptian civilization exerted its first and profound influence on other parts of Africa, such as Nubia, Wawat, Kush, etc. Around the time of the reign of Amenemhet IV, 1801 and 1792 BC, and the early stages of the 13th dynasty, Egypt went through a long period of turmoil and invasion. The Egyptians were so wildly disunited that they neglected to defend the kingdom. It collapsed easily, c. 1788 BC. Before a wave of invaders known as the Hyksos or Shepherd Kings. These Hyksos dominated Egypt for about 200 years. This period is known to the Egyptians as the Great Humiliation. Now, after long and exhaustive research, it appears that the Hyksos were descendants of the ancient Horites or Hurrians. A.T. Olmsted confesses that there is much obscurity about their race. We can at least state that they were Western Semites and that their main center of power was northern Syria. However, I do not agree with Olmsted when he says that they are Semites. Much evidence indicates that they are Japanese, Indo-Iranian or Indo-European, descendants of what we today call the white race. But I do agree with Olmsted when he says that the center of their power was in northern Syria. The Hurrians came from the southern Caucasus Mountains and established their new capital at Mitanni in Syria and Assyria. These Hurrians began to penetrate the dark world of the Middle East around 1800 BC. Herbert Wendt writes, in the ancient Sumerian epics the land of Churum is mentioned south of the Caucasus, and in the Old Testament the Hurrians appear as the Kori, or Horites. In about 1720 BC they conquered, under the name of Hyksos, the kingdom of Egypt, where they reigned as shepherd kings. When the Hurrians invaded the Middle East, they were a white or light-skinned race. They mixed with the indigenous black population and took up permanent residence among them. They established colonies everywhere they traveled. During the second millennium, the Hurrians invaded Egypt under the name Hyksos. They came with horses and chariots, which terrified the Egyptians. The Egyptians had never seen horses, and the Egyptians had probably never seen such a heterogeneous population of white, yellow, light brown, and chocolate people. So the Hyksos came to Egypt and established the 15th and 16th dynasties. These dynasties are known to the Egyptians as the period of the Great Humiliation. During this period the Egyptians had to endure insults from foreigners to their gods and their culture. Many scholars believe that the Hyksos were in power in Egypt when the ancient Hebrews came down to live and buy corn. This would mean that the Hebrews emigrated to Egypt between 1788 and 1580. The Hyksos were hospitable to the Hebrews because they themselves were foreigners. It was one of the Hyksos pharaohs who elevated Joseph, the wise Hebrew, to the position of viceroy of Egypt. Thanks to this, Joseph saved Egypt from famine. Over time, the Egyptians in the Upper Egyptian city of Thebes waged wars of liberation against the Hyksos. The new and powerful native Egyptian leader promoted an ardent nationalist policy to regain control of the government. As a result, the Hyksos were expelled from Egypt. The new kingdom or new empire. A new king arose over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, "Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, or else they will multiply and, whenever there is war, they will join our enemies and fight against us and drive us out of the land." Much evidence points to the new pharaoh who ascended to the throne being Ahmose I or Ahmes, the first king of the brilliant 18th dynasty, 1580 and 1557 BC. He re-established government in Thebes, expelled the Hyksos, and instituted something resembling a fascist form of government. This government was an autocratic nationalist regime which exercised regimentation of industry, rigid censorship, and forced suppression of opposition. The period of this nationalist dynasty marked a turning point in the fortunes of the Hebrews, who had previously been highly regarded by the deposed Hyksos kings. They now lost their status as favorites, and their previous contributions to the nation were ignored. Their freedom of movement was restricted, male genocide was decreed, and gradually the Hebrews were reduced to slavery. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and increased. And they grieved because of the children of Israel. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of service in the field. All their service, in which they made them serve, was with rigor. And the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of the one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah, and he said, When ye shall perform the midwife's office to the Hebrew women, and ye see them upon the stools, if it be a son, ye shall kill him, but if it be a daughter, she shall live. During the period when the Hebrews were slaves to Pharaoh, they built many of the megalithic structures. The Hebrews erected some pyramids, dug a large number of river canals, built city walls and ramparts, built the halls of Karnak for Thutmose, built temple pylons, hypostyle halls, and an obelisk for Amenhotep III. By edict of Rameses II they built at Thebes the temple of the Ramesseum with its colossal statues of himself, and they built the treasure cities of Pithom and Rameses. Of course, Hebrews were not the only slaves in Egypt. There were Ethiopian slaves, Nubians, Canaanites, Syrians, and people from the Aegean islands, but Hebrew slaves were the majority. The New Kingdom or New Empire era was shaped by the most remarkable and outstanding black personalities known, not only in Egypt but in the entire civilized world. They were brilliant men endowed with gallantry and the ability to reorganize the civil and military administrations. After the Asiatic invaders had humiliated the Egyptians, the people quickly forgot their phobia of horses and learned to use chariots. They made sophisticated iron weapons. The generals organized the horsemen and other soldiers into powerful expeditionary forces to conquer Syria, Mitanni, and the territory extending to the fourth cataract of the Nile. In 1501 BC, the fourth king of the 18th dynasty was enthroned. He was Thutmose III, known as the Hornet because he wore this insignia on his crown. Thutmose was the son of Thutmose I and a concubine, Isis. His facial features were pure ink black, a broad nose and thick lips. He reigned jointly with his wife and half-sister, Queen Hatshepsut. He ruled alone, 1481 and 1447 BC. Thutmose was one of the greatest Egyptian kings. He began his rule by deposing his father in a palace revolution, but along with his queen, was temporarily removed by the revolution of Thutmose I, his father, and II, his brother. Eventually, Thutmose regained control of the government, invaded Syria with a large army in 1479, and defeated the king of Kadesh at Megiddo. Thutmose III lived up to his reputation as a hornet. He conducted 17 military campaigns in Asia. His navy conquered the islands of the Aegean Sea and added them to his colossal empire. Akhenaten or Amenhotep IV. Many years after the death of Thutmose III, a new king named Amenhotep IV became a religious innovator. He was not an excellent soldier or governor. He believed in one god, the sun god Aten, who ruled over all living beings. Because he was overly concerned with religion, he neglected the kingdom. He ordered the temples of the ancient Egyptian gods to be closed and expelled the priesthood. He also changed his name from Amenhotep to Echbaten, meaning, Aten is satisfied. He moved his capital from Thebes to Tel El Amarna. When Akhenaten attempted to revolutionize religion, this act divided the Egyptian aristocracy and weakened the government. In addition, Akhenaten was too busy to send military aid to Egyptian allies or to remote countries of the empire that were threatened by revolts or invasions. Prediction of Moses. One of the kings of the 18th or 19th dynasty was informed by his astrologer, or sacred scribe, that a child was to be born to the Hebrew nation. If he were allowed to live, he would bring the Egyptian kingdom to a low condition. The child was born, his name was Moses. He was raised in a miraculous manner, in Pharaoh's own palace by his daughter. The plot to destroy Moses in his infancy failed. Pharaoh's daughter adopted Moses as her son. She came to her father and said, I have raised a child who is of divine form and generous mind, and as I have received him from the bounty of the river, in a wonderful manner, I have thought fit to adopt him as my son and heir to your kingdom. When she put the child in Pharaoh's hand, Pharaoh embraced him and placed the diadem on his head. Moses threw the diadem to the ground and, in a childish mood, twisted it and trampled it underfoot. The sacred scribe saw all this. He was the same astrologer who predicted that the birth of Moses would cause the fall of the Egyptian kingdom. On account of this, the astrologer cried out in a terrifying manner, saying, This, O king! This child is he of whom God foretold that if we kill him we shall be in no danger. he himself attests the prediction of the same, by this trampling of thy government, and treading upon thy diadem. The astrologer advocated having Moses executed in order to free the Egyptians from fear and deprive the Hebrews of hope and freedom. At this intense moment, the Pharaoh's daughter quietly took the child. As the king loved his daughter, he was not willing to harm her. When events came to this juncture, divine providence protected Moses, prevailing upon the king to pardon him. Moses was educated, as Josephus says, and it is very likely that he received the best education that the ancient world could give. We must remember that Egypt possessed institutions of higher learning and that the palace and temple of Pharaoh were the main center of the educated class. Moses was exposed to the best that Egypt had to offer. Those who think that Moses was just an ignorant religious leader are very wrong. Moses knew the political, social, and natural sciences of Egypt. He learned the religious system, the political system, mathematics, geometry, biology, chemistry, anatomy, foreign languages, law, engineering, and military tactics. Josephus writes, Moses reached the age of maturity and displayed his virtue and abilities to the Egyptians. The Egyptians interpreted Moses' actions as their impending doom and the elevation of the Hebrews. During the course of Egyptian history, there were many wars with the Kushite kingdom of Ethiopia. Sometimes this region is referred to as Nubia. When Moses had reached the age of maturity, the Ethiopians were making incursions into Egyptian territory. The Egyptians were in a state of bitter distress because of these predatory attacks. Josephus says that they penetrated as far as the city of Memphis near the Nile Delta. Because of the urgency of the military situation, the Egyptians made an inquiry through the oracles and prophesies. Their God told them to secure Moses' help. Pharaoh then ordered his daughter to bring Moses to his presence, but before that the Pharaoh had to swear to his daughter that no misfortune would befall him. Moses was brought to the presence of Pharaoh, informed of the deteriorating military situation, and given the position of general of the Egyptian army. The Egyptian priests only gave tacit consent. The Hebrews were very excited by the rise of Moses, but they did not dare to believe in his loyalty and expected that he would be killed in the following battles. The Hebrews were very excited by the rise of Moses. They expected Moses to free them. Moses gathered his army and marched south. He did not follow the Nile, but took the inland route, aware that the Ethiopians would be more vigilant on the river. But the land route presented a grave danger. It was inhabited by deadly snakes, which this area produced in droves. Legend has it that these snakes fly through the air and descend upon men without their knowledge. Therefore, Moses devised an ingenious plan to combat these evil creatures. He filled baskets with an animal called ayibs and carried them with him. These ayibs are very dangerous to the snake family. They fly after them and consume them completely. When Moses approached the land of the snakes, he released the ayibs, and they destroyed the snakes. Then Moses approached the Ethiopians secretly. He defeated them in battle and demolished their cities. Those who escaped retreated to Saba, Sheba, their capital. Josephus says that Saba was a royal city of the Ethiopians which the Emperor Cambyses of Persia later renamed Meroe, after his sister. The capital of Ethiopia used to be located at Napata, in the Fourth Cataractus. Later it was moved to Meroe. Moses found the city of Meroe well fortified. It was surrounded by a high wall, and there was a river around the wall which made it look like an island. The city was built so strongly that when the water of the river became violent, it could not move the foundations of the city. The city of Meroe was extremely difficult to subdue and the army was inactive. Then, the daughter of the Ethiopian king happened to see Moses as he was leading the army near the wall, fighting with great gallantry. Finally, the daughter of the Ethiopian king agreed to a peace treaty with Moses, agreeing to hand over the city if he would marry her. Moses consummated the marriage and set out with his wife for Egypt. Moses returned to the capital of Egypt during the reign of one of the kings of the 19th century. Dynasty, probably Rameses I, or Seti. The Egyptians hated Moses even more when they heard that he had been successful in battle. The Egyptians became suspicious of Moses because they thought he would incite a slave uprising, so they plotted to assassinate him. When Moses learned of the conspiracy, he escaped to the land of Midian. Ramses II. Rameses II was the fourth king of the 19th dynasty, 1292 and 1225 BC and son of Seti I. He was of pure black complexion, had thick lips and a broad nose, like the inhabitants of present-day Western Sudan. He was a warrior pharaoh, industrious and energetic, who ruled Egypt for 67 years. In the early years of his reign, he took part in the important campaign against the Hittites. At Kadesh, near Syria, the battle was indecisive. Finally, he signed a permanent peace treaty with the king of the Hittites, married the king's daughter, and the remaining years of his life were relatively peaceful. Ramses II is also known for his national public works projects. Because these projects required the forced labor of thousands of Hebrew slaves, he is known as the Pharaoh of oppression. He was a boastful, vain, and tyrannical personality who sought to astonish mankind by covering the country with megalithic structures. This Ramesses moved the capital to the Nile Delta. Black Jews built the treasure cities, Pithom and Ramesses. Ramesses developed the Nile Delta and had slaves build Egypt's megaliths, the colonnade at Luxor and its gigantic pylon, in front of which he placed 6 colossal statues of himself. Each of these statues was nearly 60 feet high. Ramesses II erased the names of his predecessors from the records and substituted his own. This Ramesses also built the hypostyle hall at Karnak and the temple called El Rameskum, near Thebes. During this period, Egypt enjoyed a high degree of prosperity, a great boom just before the recession. When Merneptah, the son of Ramses II, came to the throne, the entire empire was falling apart. Moses entered Egypt, probably during the reign of Ramesses II or Merneptah. Moses, was commissioned by the God of Israel to go down to Egypt and tell Pharaoh to let his people go. Moses had no great difficulty in entering Pharaoh's palace. He had grown up in the king's palace and knew Egyptian protocol. He decided to enter the palace at the time when Pharaoh was receiving several ambassadors from foreign nations. After Egypt was weakened and terrorized by the scourge of the 10 plagues, the Pharaoh agreed to emancipate the Hebrew slaves. Beginning with the reign of Merneptah and the kings of the 20th dynasty, Egypt was in a state of decline. There were revolts throughout the empire. It is evident that the emancipation of the Hebrew slaves may have triggered these revolts, producing a chain reaction. Internal weakness and attacks from external enemies marked the defeat and decline of the empire. In the 10th century BC, the Libyans invaded Egypt and established the 22nd Bubastite dynasty. Under this Libyan dynasty, Egypt attempted to revive the empire. Sheshonq or Shishak invaded Palestine and entered into combat with the Davidic dynasty. At this time, most of Shishak's troops were Libyans and Cushitans. After 200 years of Libyan rule, the Cushites invaded Egypt and the Middle East, becoming a major power. Then the Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, and Arabs invaded Egypt in succession, ending Egyptian rule. Kos, Ethiopia. The ancient country of Gush was located in the eastern region of Sudan, in Africa. During the Middle Ages, Sudan was not united or organized as a single country. The Afro-Asian world considered Sudan to be the territory stretching from the Sahara Desert almost to the equator, its widest part about 1,000 miles. It also extended from the Atlantic Ocean to the Ethiopian highlands in the east, its longest part about 4,000 miles. This vast area included countries such as present-day Sudan, Chad, Niger, Mali, Guinea, Senegal, Gambia, Upper Volta, etc. During the colonial period, this area was divided into 2 parts called French Sudan in the west and Anglo-Egyptian Sudan in the east. The word Sudan is an Arabic word meaning black. The Arabs called this vast area Laila des Sudan, the territory of the blacks, because the tribes here were very black, not mixed. When discussing the Kingdom of Kush, we find that it is situated in eastern Sudan, near the Red Sea. The country of Kush was situated on both sides of the Nile River, between the 3rd and 6th cataracts. The modern nation called Sudan occupies this territory. The important cities of ancient Kush were Napata, Meroe, Muzawarat, Kuru, Kirgis, and Noga. There were 2 civilizations of the Ethiopian people on the African continent. One was in the Ethiopian highlands with its capital at Aksum, the second was located in the region of present-day Sudan with its capital at Napata and, at other times, at Meroe. The inhabitants of the ancient country of Kush were called Nuba or Nubians as subnames, Other subnames they use are Bajars or Aisharin, which are subtribes. These people, it would be correct to say, are Ethiopians from the north living in the Sudan. European writers are accustomed to calling various tribes of Africa by the infamous name of Negroes. True Africans are really Africans, regardless of what they look like. Africans have their own tribal names and do not need the European appellations of Nigerians, Negroes, black people or Negroids. The Cusite conquest. As the power of Egypt's Libyan kings began to wane in the 8th century, the northern Ethiopian king, Ayenki, marched from his capital at Napata and invaded Egypt. The Kushite kings of Napata and Meroe were subjects of the Egyptian crown for over 1,000 years. They paid tribute mainly in gold, ivory, slaves, cattle, and fighting men. By this time the Ethiopians were brave enough to challenge the world's greatest empire. Ayenki's elite troops and powerful naval forces attacked city after city all the way to Memphis. Hermopolis fell to him. Even Osorkon's capital at Heliopolis could not resist his advances. The enemy capitulated in the capital, and Ethiopian supremacy was established in Egypt. Rogers says that Pianki sailed home to the south, his ships laden with silver, gold, copper, cloth, and everything from the northern lands, all the produce of Syria and all the sweet forests of God's land. His Majesty sailed up the river with a glad heart, the shores on both sides were jubilant. The west and the east sing, O mighty ruler Pianki, you come, having won dominion of the north. Around the year 712 BC, another king, Ethiopian, arose over the city of Napata. This new king was called Shabaka or Sabakon, brother of Pianki. He established the 25th dynasty, Ethiopian, in Egypt. According to Manktho, he burned alive Bacchoris, the supposed ruler of the 24th dynasty. Throughout the long history of the Middle East, there have always been wars between the military powers of the north of the land of Israel, via Syria, and the military powers of the south of Israel, Egypt. Israel was the Betza Bain Hapalish Hasidon, the egg between the hammer and the anvil. In the time of Aliyah and Hezekiah, the kings of Jaindali, Assyria, and Egypt were the great powers. Both powers had threatened the independence of the small state of Jaindali, but with God's help it survived. The prophet Isaiah had told King Ahaz to sit still and do nothing. In other words, Isaiah meant not to make any alliance with Assyria or Egypt, but to trust in the God of Israel. One of Shbaka's most famous generals was Taharka or Tiraka, son of Pianki. This Ethiopian general fought against Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, when the Assyrians threatened the existence of Judah. Taharka captured Philistia in 688 AD, but was defeated at Eltk, west of Jerusalem, by the Assyrians. Taharka was also the third king of the 25th Egyptian dynasty, 715 and 663. At first he defeated Esarhaddon, but 3 years later, 671, he was driven out of the city of Memphis and never returned. Ethiopia, this African state, became a great power, though only for a period of 100 years. Had Assyria not arisen when it did, Ethiopia would probably have lasted another 100 years as a Western Mediterranean power. The fact that the Ethiopians were defeated by the Assyrians should not obscure the fact that their existence and influence were stifled or drowned. Indeed, Rogers says that Nastasan, a later king of the Ethiopians, defeated the great Persian conqueror, Cambyses in 525 BC. At this time, the Ethiopians still exerted political and economic influence over the African tribes to the south and west. Just as culture and civilization spread from Greece and Rome throughout the European continent, culture and civilization spread from Egypt and Ethiopia to other parts of the African continent. It seems that the Tsitian civilization developed in 2 stages, first in the famous city of Napata and then in the industrial city of Meroe. The political power of Napata was based on the influx of gold. Here is an excellent description of the abundance of gold in Ethiopia. Cambyses pushed his authority along the Nile, beyond Thebes and the first cataract in Ethiopia. This exotic country aroused the curiosity of the Persians, with its elephants, ivory, and gold. They said that the prisoners from Ethiopia wore golden shackles. Ethiopian domination of the Nile began to increase after the decline of the Libyan kings of Egypt during the 10th century. Kashta was one of the greatest of the Enapata kings. He began the conquest of Egypt, which was continued by his son Pianki. The city of Enapata was situated in the bend of the river between the third and fourth cataracts. History shows that the greatest civilizations developed along the banks of rivers, and this was the case with the Ethiopian cities of Napata and Meroe. Meroe was a larger city than Napata. It was situated between the fifth and sixth cataracts and between the Nile and Atbara rivers. Meroe is a very ancient city. As you have read, Moses, the Hebrew, led an Egyptian army against it around 1350 BC. Obviously, it was still standing when Thutmose I, 1510 and 1501, established its southern border in Ethiopian territory. This border was situated beyond Napata, almost to the fifth cataract. Between 595 and 550 the capital of Gush was moved from Napata to Meroe. The main reason for this move was the aggression Persian against Ethiopia after 595 BC. Two other reasons probably contributed to the transfer of the capital. 1. The city of Meroe was surrounded by grasslands with scattered trees. 2. In this area were found large deposits of iron ore. Iron ore gave a great impetus to the civilization of Gush and other African tribes. L. Rogers, F. Adams and W. Brown, European writers, state that there is evidence that at the time when Europeans were still content with rude stone tools, Africans had invented the art of smelting iron. Excavators have even found the furnaces in which iron ore was smelted, and have found mountains of iron slag. Preservation of the Cushian identity. Although the Egyptians dominated parts of Ethiopia for over 1,000 years, the Ethiopians largely retained their own identity, ideas, and customs. The Cushites were never absorbed, nationally, into the Egyptian social structure. Some authorities have postulated that the pharaohs of the 25th dynasty, Ethiopian, accepted Egyptian gods. However, these kings were buried in their tombs in a position that was in keeping with Ethiopian tradition but not with Egyptian custom. After 500 BC a more distinctive Cushite culture arose, similar to a Cushite Renaissance. The gods are those of Meroe, not Egypt. The stone ram, a symbol of the power of the god Amion, stood outside the temple of Noga, a Cushite city. The Meroites used Egyptian hieroglyphic writing in their temple, but after 225 BC they devised their own alphabet even before Rome became a great power. They began to create fine pottery in their own original styles. They also built majestic temples and palaces of beautiful design. Many of the ruins of ancient Kush still stand at Meroe, Uzawarat, Noga, and near Napata. Basil Davidson says these sites are waiting for more archaeologists, with time and money, to excavate them. The Cushites built a powerful empire in Africa that stretched far and wide. Their political and military dominance extended to the Red Sea, to the kingdom Aksumite, in the south. Evidence has been found that Ethiopian influence extended as far as Lake Chad and into Uganda. There was even trade with Arabia, India, China, Egypt, Aksum, and neighboring tribes. Kush was not a playboy on the international scene, but he was recognized and known among the greatest powers of the time. The Ethiopians fought successive wars with the Egyptians, the Hebrews, the Assyrians, and the Persians, and under the Aksumite kingdom he fought against the Arabs. Kush was a sophisticated power, and during its greatness it became the mistress of the South. The greatness of Ethiopia is written in the annals of ancient nations. It sent its ambassadors to the known nations of its time. Herodotus, the Greek historian, knew little about the Ethiopians. Moreover, he did not visit this intriguing land. When Herodotus heard of this land, he called the people Aethiops. In the Greek language this word means burnt face. He never called them by their national name, which is Kush. Finally, civilization in the highlands of ancient Ethiopia, at Aksum, began to rise. King Izana of Aksum marched to the city of Meroe and attacked it, putting an end to its greatness. The causes of the wars between Meroe and Aksum were probably trade competition and the influx of Nubians from the Sahara. The Black Hebrews of Egypt and Ethiopia. From what period can we certify the existence of Black Hebrews in Egypt and Ethiopia? It is true that the Israelites were in Egypt and Ethiopia during the period of King Takelot of Egypt, 23rd Tanite dynasty about 725 BCE, and the prophet Isaiah of Jerusalem, for we read in Isaiah 11 verse 11 that, "And it shall come to pass in that day, that the Lord will set forth his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left, from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, Upper Egypt, and from Cush, Ethiopia. In Isaiah 27 verse 13, the exiles of Judah are understood to be in the land of Egypt. In 1918, the prophet states that 5 cities, with converted Jews and Egyptians, will accept the God of Israel and speak the language of Canaan, Hebrew. Some 70 years after Isaiah, the prophet Zephaniah 3:10 says, "From beyond the river of Egypt, the exiles of Judah shall be cut off from among the people, and shall be cut off from among the people, and shall be cut off from among the people. From Ethiopia my suppliants, the daughter of my dispersed ones, shall bring to my offering." Many authorities have agreed that Zephaniah was speaking of the Jews who were dispersed and who colonized the region of Ethiopia and its surroundings. Since the Hebrew prophets and historians, for example Josephus, knew that Jews were in Egypt and Ethiopia, the next question is, what are some of the theories about their arrival in these countries? The theories are as follows. King Solomon married the daughter of the king of Egypt. Obviously, this marriage was for economic and political reasons. 1 Kings 11 verse 1. Solomon wanted to maintain international peace, security, and trade. He probably agreed with Pharaoh, his father-in-law, to establish Jewish trading colonies on the Nile River. By the way, Solomon married the daughters of many kings to keep them under his economic and political control. In 1 Kings 9 verse 26, we read that King Solomon made a fleet of ships at Ezion-Geber, which is by Elotlai, on the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. And Hiram, the king of Tyre or Phoenicia, sent in the fleet his servants, shipwrights who had knowledge of the sea, with Solomon's servants. And they came to Ophir and took from their gold 420 talents, and brought it to King Solomon. Many scholars have postulated that the land of Ophir is located on the eastern coast of Africa. This would be in the territory of Ethiopia. It seems very likely that Solomon established trading colonies along both the eastern and western coasts of the Red Sea. Ancient Ethiopia had excessive gold deposits to meet the need for gold. Solomon. As mentioned above, the Persian troops of Cambyses said that the prisoners from Ethiopia wore golden shackles. The Queen of Sheba visited Solomon. The fact that her visit occurred after the voyage of Solomon Hiram's fleet to Ophir suggests that, in the writer's mind, Ophir was associated with the territory of that wealthy Queen of Sheba. Apparently, when Solomon's army arrived at Ophir, the Queen of Sheba heard of Solomon's greatness. Josephus, the Jewish historian, certified the fact that the Queen of Sheba was the Queen of Egypt and Ethiopia. This would mean that Jewish trading colonies were established in her territory. Josephus also says that the royal city of the Ethiopians was Saba 30, or Saba. The two words are interchangeable. According to the Ethiopians and the black Jews of this country, the Queen of Sheba gave birth to a son of whom they say Solomon was the father. Furthermore, they say that other black Jews accompanied the queen back to Ethiopia. The name of the child she gave birth to was Menelik. Years later, it is said, Menelik returned to Jerusalem for his education. On his return trip to Ethiopia, Solomon sent with him some important priests and officials. All these events occurred during the 10th century before Christ. This was probably the first organized Jewish colony in Ethiopia. In this same century, Shishak, the king of Egypt, invaded Palestine, 1 Kings 14 verse 25. He must have transported many Jews to Egypt and Ethiopia, for he sought prisoners with him, and his army consisted of Libyans and Ethiopians. During the latter part of the 8th century or the early part of the 7th century, the Ethiopian gentleman Tiraka invaded Palestine and captured more than one town. The prophet Isaiah certainly knew what he was talking about when he referred to the Israelite exiles in the land of Tiraka at that time. Even the advance of the powerful Assyrian army motivated many Israelites to take refuge in Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia. The raids of the powerful army of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, 608 to 675 AD, into Palestine also undoubtedly provoked rapid and numerous waves of Israelites fleeing to North and East Africa. In Jeremiah 44 verse 1, the prophet addresses the Jews of Egypt and the Jews living in Pathros, which is southern Egypt. Jeremiah tells the Jews, in the 11th verse, that they are not safe from Nebuchadnezzar. This warning would naturally influence many Jews to migrate into the interior of Ethiopia and the Sahara Desert. In the time of the prophet Zephaniah, about 630 BCE, Ethiopia and the adjacent lands of Uganda and Kenya were teeming with black Jews. Zephaniah 3 verse 10, From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia my suppliants, the daughter of my dispersed ones, shall bring my offering. This verse is an indication that the Israelites would multiply and make conversions among the inhabitants beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. No doubt this prophet had communication with the Jews in this remote area. The rivers of Ethiopia connect with the Nile water system in the heart of Ethiopia. The Atbara River runs from the highlands of modern Ethiopia to the Nile. The Blue Nile runs from the direction of Addis Ababa in a northwesterly direction towards the Nile. Near Uganda and the north of the Congo is the Baba el-Ghal River. It is 500 miles long. In southwestern Sudan, it is formed by the confluence of the Bahr el-Arab and Jir rivers in the northwest of the Upper Nile. It flows east to join at Leitno with the Bahr el-Jebel and form the White Nile. These areas are beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Furthermore, there are any records or oral traditions of the existence of Jewish tribes deep in, beyond the rivers of Ethiopia? Joseph J. Williams cites a particular case. He says, there can be no doubt that at some time in the dim past, probably through Abyssinia, a wave of Jewish settlers came from the east, and the rivers of the Arabs came from the east, and the rivers of the Jir flowed from the east to the east, and the rivers of the Jir flowed from the east to the east, and the rivers of the Arabs flowed from the east to the east, and the rivers of the Jir flowed from the east to the W. Hebrew culture penetrated the lake region of East Africa, if we may believe the following quotes, speaking of Uganda, west of Lake Victoria and northeast of the Belgian Congo. It has an organized native government, with a tradition of 33 kings and a legendary line going back to King David. It is a proud history. Legends say that the Ugandan people crossed the Nile, remember, beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, centuries ago and subdued all the tribes whose country they passed through. They claim to be the greatest native civilization in Africa. The above report is very credible in all its details, if we bear in mind what I have written in relation to the Egyptian and Cushite Jews. What might be questioned about the Ugandan people is not their identity, but the vitality of their Jewishness. Religion. Jews Tababan Kamant and Wasambara. Professor Alan S. Godby says that the word Tababan means blacksmiths. He has located these Jews in central Ethiopia. The Tababan Jews were really falashas, but they were forced to accept a nominal Christianity. They were like the Moroccan Jews in Spain, forced to accept a religion against their will. The word falasha in Amharic, the official language of Ethiopia, means immigrants. The falashas did not call themselves by this name, they used the name, Bet Israel, the house of Israel, but the Abyssinians called them falashas. Since the other tribes of Ethiopia called the house of Israel falashas or immigrants, this would suggest that perhaps the falasha Jews came to Abyssinia at a later date. Therefore, they were ostracized because they did not accept Christianity. The falashas had a monopoly on the specialized trades in Ethiopia. They were leatherworkers, potters, blacksmiths and bricklayers. The Jews of Kamant were divided into two classes, the Keberti, honorable ones, from whom priests are chosen, and the Yetanti, small or insignificant people. Incidentally, these two classes were called by names similar to those in Hebrew. The Kamant Jews highly esteem Moses and many other Old Testament personalities. They observe Yom Kippur and the festivals of the dead. Since they remain isolated from other Jews, Christians and pagans, they learn very little from the outside world. About 1,500 miles south of the Falasha territory live the Wasambara. They come in a wide variety of colors, from light brown to black. In their land are found institutions of asylum, cities of refuge. They are like the Levitical cities found in the Old Testament. Professor Godby says, taken with sacrifices, wherever Judaism is known, it must have been introduced by Yemenite or Himyaritic Jewish traders at very early times. Ancient. About the Wasanibara people, on the eastern coast of Africa, opposite the island of Zanzibar, we know very little. But it is a known fact among scholars that Jewish merchants from Yemen traded along that coast. It is possible that Jewish colonies were established there at an early date. It is also probable that Jewish tribes migrated from the north. I have shown above that Jewish immigrants crossed the Red Sea into Ethiopia, and that Jewish immigrants migrated from Egypt into Ethiopia. My conclusion is this: the nation of Ethiopia became a confluence or crossroads of a wave of Hebrew culture and settlement. Here in Ethiopia was the great center of the black Jews. They exchanged ideas, some settled to stay, others left for the west and south. Joseph I. Williams, quoting Walter Chisel Plowden, the British consul in Abyssinia, agrees with my conclusion. After the British consul reviewed the national records and traditions, he concluded, two things are certain, that at a much later period 6 sovereigns of pure race and Jewish faith reigned in Gondar, and that to this day numerous Jews are to be found throughout Abyssinia. I also think it very probable that, at whatever period it may be placed, the whole of Abyssinia was of Jewish belief before its conversion, as even those who have adopted the Christian creed still retain numerous forms and observances. As we can conclude from the above and other records, the Christians of Abyssinia were once Jews. Incidentally, Solomon Grazel, in his book A History of the Jews, has claimed that there are still 100,000 black Jews in Ethiopia who are not Christians. After King Abraha of Ethiopia accepted Christianity in the 4th century AD, a great change occurred that was disastrous for the existence of the Jews. They became victims of a persecution that lasted for many centuries. Since the rise of Christianity in Ethiopia, Judaism has declined. However, despite social pressures and discrimination, 100,000 black Jews have managed to survive. This multitude of Jews, surviving in hostile conditions, demonstrated their greatest numerical strength in the early days of their history. The Jews of the Malagasy Republic. There is an island off the southeast coast of Africa called the Malagasy Republic. The ancient name of this island was Madagascar. Near the eastern part of this island, on the island of Saint Marie, there exists a group of black Jews who call themselves Safin Ibrahim, descendants of Abraham. Professor Alan H. Godby says that the same alphabetic writing which was present in Palestine about 650 NC appeared at the same time in Malaya. Furthermore, he says, since the Hovers of Madagascar are members of the Malay family who probably immigrated from Cambodia, this indicates the historical connection with the Jews of Madagascar. Like the Jews of Ethiopia, Uganda, and Wasambara, there is a multiplicity of Jewish cultural survivals, complexes, patterns, and traits at work among the Jews of Madagascar, such as the following: the day counted from sunset to sunset, many days of fasting, the consumption of beef, the New Year's feast, the making of a small fire on the first night of the feast. They have rituals of purification of the village. They sprinkle ritual blood on the doorposts of the new year. This last ritual may be reminiscent of the Passover ceremony observed in the month of Aviv. This month is the first of the Jewish civil New Year. In this month the kings of Israel were inaugurated. Black Jews of North Africa. In 331, when Alexander the Great defeated the Persian Emperor Darius at the Battle of Gaugamela, correctly called Arbela, a new master emerged on the world stage and transformed the history and culture of 3 continents. However, Alexander died in the prime of life, at the age of 32, from debauchery and intoxication. Before Alexander's death, his desire was to establish a Eurasian state. His plan was to amalgamate the Greeks with the Asians. This was accomplished by widespread intermarriage of his troops with colored women from the east. Most of his troops remained in the subjugated countries and were absorbed into the native population. After Alexander's death, his vast empire was divided among his generals. Ptolemy received Egypt and Seleucus received Asia. As time went on, there were a constant war between these 2 dynasties. In the year 198 BC, the descendants of General Seleucus had their capital in Syria, just north of Palestine. In this same year the Seleucid dynasty in Syria forced Egypt to give up Palestine, the land of the Jews. The king of Syria at this time was Antiochus III. When Antiochus IV usurped the throne of Syria, 175 to 163 BC, he thought of uniting Alexander's empire. This meant conquering Egypt. However, the province bordering Egypt was Palestine, which stood in his way. At this time, the Jews did not accept Greek culture, yet Antiochus was determined to Hellenize the Jews. Antiochus' army marched into Palestine to support Menelaus, the leader of the pro-Syrian party. As a result, many Jews were killed, others escaped to the hills and to Egypt. Only the Jews who supported Antiochus' policy remained in Jerusalem. An edict was issued prohibiting the observance of the festivals, the Sabbath, and circumcision. A statue of Jupiter was erected in the Holy Temple on the altar. To this statue the people brought sacrifices of pork, an animal abominable to the Jews. Because of this religious persecution, the legitimate high priest, Onias III, and many other Jews fled to African countries such as Egypt, Ethiopia, and Cyrenaica, Libya. Throughout the last 25 years, the main factors contributing to the social migration of the Jews were wars, religious persecution, and trade. All these factors were at work and gave rise to the African Jewish population. In 65 AD, Roman armies under the command of General Pompey captured Jerusalem. In 70 AD, General Vespasian and his son Titus destroyed the Jewish state with great slaughter. During the period of the military governors of Palestine, many outrages and atrocities were committed against the rest of the people. During the period from Pompey to Julius, it has been estimated that more than 1,000 of Jews fled to Africa, escaping Roman persecution and slavery. The slave markets were full of black Jewish slaves. And the Lord will scatter you among all peoples, from one end of the earth to the other, and there you will serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, wood and stone. Deuteronomy 28:1. This prophecy and all the rest of the prophecies contained in Deuteronomy 28 verses 15 to 8 happened to the black Jews after they disobeyed God's laws. Many nations transported the Jews into slavery, and the children of Israel transmigrated to all continents. The Jewish philosopher, Philo, ca. 40 AD, who lived in Alexandria, Egypt, said that 1 million Jews resided in Libya and Egypt from the Catabathmos to the borders of Ethiopia. Professor A. H. Godby says that Philo leaves us in doubt as to what borders of Ethiopia he was referring to. I think Philo was referring to the western and southern borders of Ethiopia, for the prophet Zephaniah mentioned, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, the daughters of my dispersed ones. There was a period of more than 600 years between Zephaniah and Philo, and allowing for the new waves of immigrants coming into Africa, they had 600 years to penetrate to all the borders of Ethiopia. E. Skura wrote that Hebraism was detectable by its inscriptions from the Egyptian border westward through North Africa to Mauritania. A. H. Godby says that Jerome, 310 to 120 AD, one of the 4 doctors of the Church, wrote that the Jews spread from the western tip of Mauritania to India. Now ancient Mauritania included part of the Atlantic Ocean territory, Morocco, and part of modern Algeria. It is certain that Jews had migrated throughout North Africa by the 2nd century. Some scholars put the date at an earlier time. The Greek historian and geographer Strabo, 63 BC and 24 AD. He said, apropos of the Jews of Gyrene, Libya, now these Jews have already introduced themselves into all the cities, and it is difficult to find a habitable place on earth which has not admitted this tribe of men and is not possessed by them, and it has come to pass that Egypt and Syrian, having the same rulers, and a great number of other nations imitate their way of life, maintain large bodies of these Jews in a peculiar manner, privileged status, and grow to greater prosperity with them and make use of the same laws with that nation also. Following the fall of the Carthaginian metropolis in North Africa, Roman power became dominant in the Barbarian states. Under Roman sovereignty and power, the Jews of Asia and North Africa revolted in the year 115 AD. The Jews considered themselves numerous enough to challenge Roman authority in the east and south. Because of their numbers, the Jews almost subdued their adversaries, who forced them to suffer many atrocities and indignities. The Emperor Trajan sent his general, Turbo, to bring about law and order. Instead of bringing law and order, the act of suppressing the insurrection brought a massacre. Suppression of rebellion under the slogan of law and order may be good in principle, but a good thing can be carried too far, so it was in this case. The pagans and the Romans indiscriminately attacked the Jews, both the Jewish soldiers and the uninvolved peaceful population, without mercy. As a result of this ruthless attack, many Jews fled to those areas of northwest Africa known as Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Mauritania. Many other Jews fled to areas where Rome had no jurisdiction, namely the southern region, the Sahara Desert, and the Sudan. Graylall says, such is the explanation of how the Sahara Desert first acquired Jewish tribes hardened by a tradition of fighting and possessing black, physical characteristics which, it is said, still make them very close to the original Jewish population of Palestine. The Jews are an omnipresent people, they seem to exist everywhere. In the early 6th century, they are found in Spain before the Mohammedan conquest. Spain is known to the Jews as the classical land of crypto-Judaism, because they pretended to be Christians but practiced Jewish ritual in secret. Already in Roman times, the Jews of Spain were numerous and influential. Many of them claimed to be descendants of noble Jews from Jerusalem who had been taken into exile by General Titus. After the Visigoth invasion, a Germanic tribe, the situation improved for the Jews because the Visigoths adopted the Arian form of Christianity and favored the Jews. However, when they converted to Catholicism, they became jealous like any other neophytes. King Richard came to the throne in 589. This was the beginning of harsh religious enactments against the Jews. When King Sisebut, or Sisebot, took the throne, the utmost religious fanaticism prevailed. In the year 616 AD the Great Commotion took place. The king ordered the baptism of all the Jews in his domains, under penalty of expulsion and loss of all their property. According to the Catholic authorities, 90,000 embraced Christianity at that time. This was a forced baptism. In the 7th century the Jews were threatened with the penalty of slavery if they were found practicing Judaism. This cruel policy caused many Jews to flee to the Mediterranean and to the west coast of Africa. The southernmost point of Spain, after crossing the sea, leads to the north or west coast of Africa. Throughout the Middle Ages many European governments expelled their Jews. These black Jews emigrated to neighboring countries, Turkey and Africa. The Lord will cause you to fall before your enemies. You will go out one way against them, and flee 7 ways before them, and you will be carried away into all the kingdoms of the earth. Deuteronomy 28:25. The Byzantine emperors in the 5th and 6th centuries persecuted Jews constantly, forcing multitudes of Jews to emigrate to the Sahara Desert in the south. At this time, the Sahara Desert was heavily inhabited by black Jews. The Arabs forced their way out of Arabia in the 7th century. In the year G40 AD, they attacked Egypt and continued through Africa. Then, a Jewish queen named Diakahina organized an army consisting of Jews and Berbers to stop the penetration of Muslims into North Africa. This queen defeated the Arabs and the people of Africa rejoiced at her victory. Years later, the Mohammedans once again faced the army of this Jewish queen and were defeated. She was defeated a second time due to the jealousy of different people in various tribes. Disgusted, her son became a Muslim and participated in the Islamic conquest of Spain in the year 711 AD. The Black Jewish Empire of Ghana. The former Black Empire of Ghana was established in Western Sudan. During the colonial period, Western Sudan was called French West Africa. The northern boundary of this region is the Sahara Desert. The western and southern boundary is Lake Chad. Some rivers in this region are the Senegal, Gambia, Volta, Benue, Logwan, and lastly the famous Niger River. This river flows from the highlands of Guinea to the northeast to the famous cities of Timbuktu and Gao, then it makes a sharp turn and flows southeast to the city of Benin in Nigeria. In ancient times, the Carthaginians from North Africa penetrated into the Sahara Desert and western Sudan during the 2nd and 3rd centuries BC. When North and East Africa had accumulated more than 1 million Jews, they began a continuous migration towards the Niger River region. According to the research of Nahum Slouch, the tradition of Jewish traders in the Sahara dates back to the Jews of the desert are not at all surprised to find traces, even survivals, of an early Judaism which once played an important role throughout the Sahara region, from Senegal to the very borders of Somaliland. As I mentioned earlier, this region stretching across the entire width of Africa, below the Sahara Desert from Senegal to Somaliland, is known as the Sudan or Black Africa. Between the 2nd and 3rd centuries, black Jews from Arabia continued to migrate across the Red Sea into Ethiopia. The largest exodus of Jews occurred during the persecution of the Arabs led by Muhammad. He had said on his deathbed that he wanted Islam to be supreme throughout the world. Arabia. There was a Jewish tribe called the Rechab who crossed the Red Sea and migrated to the tip of western Sudan. At the same time that Jews were migrating westward through the Sudan from Ethiopia, they were also migrating southward from Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, toward the fertile region between the Senegal and Niger rivers. When Jews from the north and east met between these two rivers, they established a confluence or crossroads. in West Africa, where men could exchange their culture, their ideas, and their goods. These Jewish migrations continued with great frequency towards the year 300 after Christ, and continued with the greatest regularity for 1200 years. Joseph J. Williams traces the course of Jewish migration from Northeast Africa. He writes that Jews went up the Nile via Memphis, Elephantine, Khartoum, and then turned west into Kordofan in central Sudan. In the White Nile region, Williams believes some Jews settled in the Shilluk country of southern Sudan and Uganda. He goes on to trace migration from Kordofan westward to Darfur, Lake Chad, Kano, and then to the Niger River countries. The original place of residence of the Songhay people was Gaunguia, Kukyu, or Kuka. This place was situated in the Dendi country and was known as Dendina, situated near the Niger River, on the northwest border of what is now the modern state of Nigeria. Many scholars believe that the Songhay people came from Egypt or Ethiopia, because they possess many complex aspects of Egyptian culture, such as the preparation of the corpse for burial. The Yemeni arrived at Kuka about 300 AD, an ancient home of the Songhay tribe. He established a line of kings known as the Zia Daja or Dia dynasty. This founder of the first Sudanese dynasty in West Africa was a black Jew, 48. His name is sometimes written Zia al-Ayman. Joseph J. Williams says that a citizen of Timbuktu named Abderrahman es Sudi wrote, 1652, in his book Tariqa es Sudan, History of the Sudan, that Zia al-Ayman was derived from Zar Milda. Yemen, meaning, coming from Yemen. Zia el-Yemeni came to the Niger country through Ouargla, in central Algeria. Ouargla was a great trading center of the black Jews. Dr. Barth and Professor Godby say that Zia, the founder of the first Jewish dynasty, established his capital later at Gao, in the east of Upper Niger. Arabs, Moors, and Sudanese writers credit the ancient African black Hebrews with the establishment of the first empires, the erection of the first public buildings in the country, the construction of the first canals and irrigation systems, and the institution of a social economic regime which still survives in all Sahrawi communities. By what factors can we account for the emergence of hegemony and leadership of the black Hebrews over the indigenous tribes? The answer is simple: the Jews came to the western Sudan from North and East Africa as a result of a chain of trade and persecutory migrations. The Jews settled among the most civilized peoples of all time. They adopted new methods from other peoples and left their material, educational, and moral mark among the peoples with whom they resided. For many centuries the Hebrews had to employ great physical and psychological initiative. They could not afford to be complacent or apathetic. They were hated, so apathy could mean cultural stagnation or death. The Jews imported into the western part of Africa a superior material, educational, and moral culture soon after 300 AD. And this cultural advance was not duplicated or surpassed until the rise of the Mohican leader Mansa Khan Musa of Mali in 1312 AD. In the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, the Africans of the west coast did not possess the cultural superiority of the Africans of the north and east coasts. Black Jews had one advantage over African tribes: they carried with them their culture, their history, their laws, and their written records. This ensured them a constant precedent for the development of a higher social organization. Because of the stability of black Jewish culture, the Jews did not become abstracted from the population. Indigenous. In fact, the Jews absorbed some of the native tribes. The Jews took advantage of every opportunity. They were an industrious and skillful people. In the Jewish states of Ghana there were kings, princes, governors, generals, secretaries, treasurers, tax collectors, judges, architects, engineers, doctors, historians, language interpreters, mathematicians, jewelers, sculptors, teachers, carpenters, art painters, goldsmiths, leather workers, potters, gunsmiths, saddlers, blacksmiths, farmers, etc. The black Hebrew kings of Ghana had two titles: Kayamaga, Master of Gold, and Ghana, or Chief. Professor C. Obey says that 22 Hebrew kings reigned in Ghana before the Hejra in AD 622, and 44 had reigned by 790. Davidson mentions the Tariq el-Fetlag, History of the Inquirer, which says that Kumbi had been the capital of the vast country of the Kayamaga, while the Tariq in Sudan states that Kayamaga had been the name of the first king of this country. It is evident that all the kings of Ghana were called by the title of Kayamaga. And as for Kumbi, the ancient capital of Ghana, it was situated in the southern part of the present country of Mali. During the Middle Ages, the name Ghana was not used to designate the country. The name of this country was Aukar, and Ghana was only the title of its kings. The knowledge of this fact indicates the greatness and splendor of those kings, because after the decline of the Zia dynasty, men began to call this country by the title of its kings, which is Ghana, and I will do the same. In the 14th century, a Muslim writer named Ibn Battuta wrote about the women of one of the towns in Ghana. He found the women of Walata to be breathtakingly beautiful, and he must have known what he was talking about because he had traveled widely. He also discovered another astonishing fact: women were more respected than men, and the latter did not express any resentment or jealousy. The people did not trace their ancestry back to a paternal chief, but to their maternal brother. An individual bequeathed his inheritance to his sister's children. The material foundations of the Ghanaian state were based on the influx of gold and iron. The use of iron in Africa, especially in Ghana, revolutionized social and military systems. F.I. Zuri claimed that the Ghanaians fought many wars against their neighbors, who did not use iron but fought with ebony rods. The Ghanaians could destroy their enemies because they fought with spears and swords. The king's tax collectors levied taxes on imports and exports, and the medium of exchange was gold. Concerning the Kingdom of Ghana, Joseph William writes, "Whatever one may think of the more or less mythical traditions connected with the early Jews in North Africa, it is now practically an established fact that a Jewish nation, at least in faith, and perhaps also in origin, long dominated south of the Sahara." Elder Danite. In the 9th century, a black African Hebrew arrived in the city of Kairouan in Algeria. In this city was located one of the famous Talmudic schools. The name of this Hebrew was Elder Danite. He told a credible story of a Hebrew businessman south of the Sahara, in western Sudan. According to Elder Danite, the Hebrews of the interior of Africa spoke a Phoenician Hebraic language mixed with Arabic. They had a religion inherited from Moses and a Hebrew emperor. This emperor was believed to be called Tlautan or Bulatan. Eld said that the people of this tribe had fled from the kingdom of Israel after Sennacherib, the Assyrian, had subdued it, and that other Israelite tribes such as Naphtali, Gad, and Asher were in the land from which he came. He spoke of the laws of Moses which they followed, the entire series of scriptures except for Esther and Lamentations. He did not speak of the legal works which were produced in Babylon and Palestine after the destruction of the first temple, of which the Algerian Jews were aware. These extraordinary works were the Mishnah and the Talmud. Eld produced as proof a ceremony relating to the sacrifice of animals for food. It was written in Hebrew with an Arabic tinge, but Eld claimed that he knew no other language than Hebrew. Concerning Eld's story, the Gain, chief of the Jews, assured the people that the story was credible. We are grateful for the travels and research of Nahum Slouses, who wrote in the early 20th century. He said, "For many years the author of this book has been gathering material for a history of Jewish migration in the Sahara and the Sudan. One part of his work is already done, establishing the authenticity of these migrations. To the writings of the Arabs and the oral traditions of the country he can now add the archaeological evidence provided by the ruins of ancient Jewish cities in the Sahara and the Sudan, and the documentary evidence of Hebrew inscriptions, such as those at Tuat, dating from the 13th and 14th centuries. It is now an established fact that Ghana was a black Hebrew state, and at this juncture I will continue my writings on the Zia dynasty of Ghana. The 15th Prince Zia took control of the great city of Gao on the Upper Niger about the year 1009. His name was Zia Kossi or Kosoi. Up to that time all the kings of Ghana professed the Hebrew religion. However, in that year a radical transformation took place. Zia Kossi accepted Islam. Davidson, quoting the Tariq el-Feltak, says that the king of Songhay, Ghana, was persuaded to convert to Islam by the merchants of the city of Gao, who had already become wealthy and economically powerful. Much of Ghana's trade was carried on with the Muslims of the north. The North Africans were ardent Mohammedans in their day, and economics and religion were partners, operating in concert in the city of Gao. I do not condemn Zia Kossi for his conversion to Islam. In fact, I will justify his conversion. Actions. Muslims dominated Ghana's vital trading links in North Africa and the Sahara, and it was good for Ghana's security that a Mohammedan king be recognized. Concerning Islam in Western Sudan, Basil Davidson makes the following observation: Islam reaches the markets of Western Sudan at least by the 9th century. But it has little initial impact. The rulers of Ghana do not accept Islam as one of their state religions. Only by the early 11th century are there a few such versions, the earliest of any significance known to us being that of the king of Gao, traditionally in 1010, followed by that of the king of Kanem Bornu in 1086. Davidson says, these are tactical conversions, these kings are Muslims in name only, motivated as much by commercial expediency as by an appreciation of the political and religious achievements and teachings of Islam. Although the kings of Ghana were Muslims, many of the inhabitants remained Jewish. The Bekri, a Muslim writer, wrote about Ghana in 1067. The king of Ghana at the time was Tenkamenin, who came to the throne in 1062. The Rekri says that the king of Ghana, Tenkamenin, was the ruler of a great empire and was able to organize an army of 200,000 men. Asterisk. In the 11th century, a Mohammedan people from the northwest invaded the city of Audagast, within the Ghana Empire. These invaders were called the Almoravids. In 1076 AD, Abu Bakr, the leader of the Almoravids, captured the capital of Ghana. However, the Islamic Jewish king was allowed to keep his throne. Tenkamenin paid tribute to Abu Bakr. At this time Gao or Gago, the capital of Ghana, was divided into two towns. The first was the king's residence. And had a fortress surrounded by a wall. The second town contained 12 mosques in which Mohammedan merchants could settle or wait to carry on their business. This description of El Bekri leaves us with the impression that the king's residence town was probably inhabited mainly by Jews, as there was a great distinction between the king's residence and that of the Mohammedans. In the city of Gao, the Islamic religion was influential, only a Muslim could be king. When a new king ascended to the throne, he received 3 imperial royal emblems consisting of the Quran, a sword, and a ring. Ahmed Baba, a native of Songhai, dates the beginning of Islam in Ghana after the year 1010. The Bekri designates the then reigning king as Kanda. Barth says that he is probably identical with the Jewish Islamic king Zye Bayuki or Bayakoi Kaima, from Ahmed Baba, the third king to succeed Zye Kosi. The Mali Empire. The Mali Empire is also called the Melestine Empire. The word Mali is derived from a Mandinka grammatical root meaning free. The rulers and people of the Mali Empire were black Africans from the Mandinka tribe. This tribe was originally located in the territory known today as Guinea-Sierra Leone and to the north. On the banks of the upper Niger, near present-day Sierra Leone, the Mandingos established their capital at a place called Niani. Following the disintegration of the Ghanaian Empire by the invasion of many tribes, Ghana was divided into several states. In the capital of Ghana, Gao, the Hebrew king Zye continued to reign. Many of Ghana's subject peoples proclaimed their independence after the chaos broke out. The most famous of these peoples were the Mandingos, who established the nucleus of a new empire around the mid-13th century, 1240 AD. There are several important factors that we must consider in order to understand the rise of Mali. First, Mali had received a significant boost and influence from its predecessor Ghana to the north. This influence can be explained in political, economic, and religious terms. Muslim traders from the north and the Sahara had their trading centers in the towns of Ghana. Mandingo traders from Mali traded with the Muslims. At that time, and to some extent today, trade and religion have worked together. Mandingo traders recognized the advantages of the powerful culture and religion of the Muslims, who were growing rapidly in the north. As a result, Mandingo traders played a great role in transporting Islam to their people. The Mandingos were a successful agricultural people. They were fortunate to have rivers which they used for irrigation. They grew rice and other staple crops, which contributed to rapid population growth. The people of Mali had enough grain to sell to the peoples of the Sahara and the north. They developed market towns that later became cities and states. With their trading ability, their skills, and their vigorous energy, Davidson said, the Mandingos became rich. Davidson continued, with the collapse of Ghana as an empire, their opportunity for great political power opened up. They seized it with a sure hand. As far as the kings of Mali are concerned, Ibn Khaldun is considered our best authority. He wrote around 1376 AD. The Mali king credited with establishing and organizing an imperial system in Mali was Sundiata. The year in which the Manding state rose to imperial power is dated 1240. In this year a decisive battle was fought between the Manding and a people of Tekru, evidently Almoravids from medieval Mauritania. Sundiata defeated Samunguru and his people, who had captured the seat of the Hebrew kings of Ghana and imposed tribute on them. Like other kings of the Western Sudan, Sundiata knew that power depended on the Wili, most of the wealth was in trade, and most of the trade was in the hands of the Muslims. He accordingly converted to Islam. Nearly 100 years after Sundiata's death, a powerful king arose in Mali. His name was Mansa Musa. During his lifetime, 1312 to 1337, his achievements surpassed those of his predecessors. His empire stretched from east to west, beginning at the Atlantic Ocean as far north as present-day Nigeria, and from north to south, reaching almost from the center of Mauritania and extending to the borders of present-day Guinea and the Ivory Coast. In 1326, Mansa Musa made a pilgrimage to Mecca, the holy city of the Mohammedans. He is said to have displayed a marvelous splendor that astonished the spectators. He came to the east with thousands of foot soldiers and more than 60,000 mounted warriors. In addition to the soldiers, he had 500 slaves, each of whom carried a golden rod weighing 6 pounds. As a contribution to the holy cities, he gave 20,000 pieces of gold. Mali, in its heyday, was known for its prosperity and peace. Within the empire there was a prevailing system of law, order, and justice. An African visitor, Ibn Battuta, said of Sudan, the inhabitants abhorred injustice more than any other people. Neither the man who travels nor the man who stays at home has anything to fear from robbers or violent men. This fact may seem incredible to those who think that black men are innately violent. During Mansa Musa's lifetime, trade increased on a large scale. Merchants from Mali established relay stations throughout the empire at important centers. These companies reached into the forest country south of the Senegal and Niger rivers. Before the time of Mansa Musa, the city of Timbuktu was founded in the late 11th century. Barth believes that it was first a small market for the inhabitants of the province of Rad. Mansa Musa is not only remembered for his achievements in pilgrimage, trade, and military affairs, but also for his public buildings. The king of Mali built a palace and several mosques in the famous city of Timbuktu. The following mosques were built on the outskirts of the city of Timbuktu. The Mosque of Jengirba was situated in the southwest and the Mosque of Sankor in the northern quarter of the city. Mansa Musa was undoubtedly a champion of Islamic religion and learning. It was the time when the city of Timbuktu and Jen began to rise as scholastic cities. Concomitantly with the Mosque of Sankor, the University of Sankor was also established. This university during the period of the dynasty of Askia the Great acquired a universal reputation as a university of theology, law, philosophy, medicine, history, etc. Before I go any further, I must explain that the later Songhai Empire was built on the foundations of the Ghana Empire. The only difference is that Songhai was larger in area, more Islamic, more scholastic, and ended with a native African king. When Emperor Khan Musa was on pilgrimage in Arabia, Sagamandir, the general of Mali, took Gao, the capital of Ghana or Songhai. Then Khan Musa returned from Arabia through Gao and accepted the capitulation of the king of Ghana and his nobles. Philip St. Laurent, who writes a monthly article on African history, see Tuesday magazine, for the Philadelphia Bulletin says that the Mali soldiers were taken prisoners from the ruling family of Dir Saboy. This was the Hebrew dynasty. Among these prisoners were Colon, or Kilon, and his brother Sail Mar, sons of Dota Yasabi. These Hebrew princes were appointed pages at the court of Mali around 1335 AD. 60 Meanwhile, Gao was subject to the political system of Mali, says Davidson, and the Mansa Khan Musa exacted tribute from its rulers. The princes of the Zia dynasty were quick to escape from the Mali court and army. They organized an army and fought against the king of Mali. Ali Colin had a deep hatred for the conquerors of Mali because they had subjugated his people. At the end of the 14th century, the army of Ali Colin, later called Soni, the liberator, Ali, attacked Niani, the capital of Mali. Yearning for independence, Soni Ali gave up paying tribute to Mali. Due to the exploits of Soni Ali, the 7th dynasty of Gao acquired a new name. The dynasty after Soni Ali is called the Soni Orsha dynasty. In this dynasty there were about 17 or 18 Islamic, Hebrew kings. The Songhai Empire. In 1464, the 16th Prince of Xi'an, Soni Ali, took over the leadership of Gao and began to build a new empire. Soni Ali attacked many of the neighboring tribes, including the city of Timbuktu, and brought them under his hegemony. For his strength, he did not rely too much on the Muslims in the cities, but above all on the inhabitants of the countryside. Soni Ali was not even a good Muslim. He adhered to the traditional religion of Gao and the Songhai people. In almost all respects, Songhai was a larger empire than that of Mali. Soni Ali systematized several schemes of organization and administration unknown to his predecessors. He appointed governors in his territories and organized a standing professional army consisting of an echelon, including a navy, on the Niger. The Songhai Empire seems to have begun with Soni Ali I. This was the time of the decline of the Mali Empire in 1350 AD, but the greatest vigor of the Songhai Empire did not come until the time of Askia the Great. As for Soni Ali's temper, many writers say that it was uncontrollable. I would kill many of his important state officials and ministers, wishing that they were alive afterwards. Soni Ali's secretary at this time was a man named FLGDR, for whom Soni Ali had ordered the death penalty for a contradiction. In the course of time a book arrived which no one in the king's court was allowed to read except FL Gada. Then the king expressed remorse for his rash action. At this juncture his secretary was brought before him. Seeing him, Soni Ali was very glad and gave valuable gifts to those who had saved him. There was another distinguished state official, who survived death in this manner, known by various names such as Mohammed Toure and Abu Rika, who succeeded Soni Ali as Askia the Great. After Soni Ali finished his business in Gao, his unstoppable military drive drove him forward. He went east and west expanding the empire. His predatory deeds earned him great booty, but a change of fortune caused his death. While crossing the Koni River, he fell into the torrent and drowned. The body of the great king was prepared and preserved according to the ancient Egyptian custom. This custom consisted of removing the intestines and inserting honey. Soni Barrow, sometimes called Abu Kchr, succeeded Soni Ali on the throne, but his reign was very brief. Following the death of Soni Ali, his most distinguished general, Mohammed Touré, plunged the empire into civil war. Mohammed Touré confronted Soni Barrow at Danga and defeated him. Then Barrow took refuge in Gao, the capital. Mohammed Touré paused for a while to reorganize his army before resuming the war. After a long and bloody battle, Soni Barrow was conquered and forced into exile. It is said that, upon hearing that Mohammed had taken the kingdom from Barrow, Soni Ali's daughters exclaimed, "Askia! Askia! Usurper!" Following this, Muhammad immediately decreed that he was to be called nothing but Askia and became known as Muhammad Askia, the founder of a native African dynasty, the last to exist in this part of the Sudan. With the rise of the Askia dynasty, the Xi'an Soni dynasty of the Black Hebrew kings was brought to an end about 1192 BC. To perpetuate his illegal rule, Muhammad Askia employed political cunning. He became a zealous Muslim and secured the confirmation of the ecclesiastical authorities. Askia appointed a group of diviners and surrounded himself with theologians. He consulted with them on many important matters. At the urging of Askia, the theologians issued a declaration that Soni Ali was a heretic and that fighting Soni Barrow was a Navarre saint. About 3 years after the civil war, Askia emulated Mansa Khan Musa of Mali by undertaking a long pilgrimage to the sacred cities of the east. His cavalcade consisted of a large number of infantry and cavalry soldiers. A retinue of 1,500 princes and chiefs of the empire also accompanied him on this pilgrimage. While Askia was in Mecca, he spent 100,000 pieces of gold, more than any other ruler had ever spent. In Mecca he bought a garden and established a charity for the people of Sudan. He gave the Caliph of Baghdad gifts that astonished the entire court, these contributions exceeded those of all other kings. The Khalifa of Baghdad, the Abbasid Motukel, was greatly impressed with Askia. With the Caliph's consent, Askia was appointed his lieutenant in Songhai, and as a sign of his authority the Caliph gave him a green fez and a turban. White. In Cairo, Egypt, Askia spent many hours among religious scholars, developing a special relationship with a scholar named Esouti. It was here in Cairo that Askia accepted many advanced concepts in political science that he put into practice in Sudan. Askia returned to his homeland with an expanded mind and many new experiences. He appointed his brother, Omar, commander of the army, and Lai began to consolidate the expanding empire started by Soni Ali. Attacking many tribes, non-believers in Islam, Askia concluded the war against the Yolofs and the Mosses. At first, he sent an ambassador to the king of the Mosses, demanding that he convert to Islam. The king refused and Askia showed no mercy in the war that followed. He decimated the villages and towns of the Mosses, took all their inhabitants prisoner and forced them to become Muslims. The extent of his empire stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to Lake Chad in the east. After 1502, Askia's army invaded the state of Mali. The Songhais suffered such heavy casualties that Omar remarked, "The Songhai will be outsiders." Askia's response was, on the contrary. "The conquered nations will make our lives easier, for they will be part of us and help us in our undertakings." Hut Askia is known for more than just its conquests. Writes Davidson, The literate culture of the Western Sudan, which has existed for several hundred years, flourished at Timbuktu during the years when the ravages of the 100 Years' War were raging in Europe. No one can say how much it flowed, or what fruits it bore, for the books which men read or wrote there are either lost or have not yet been found, but Africans, 2 centuries later, gives some measure of the intellectual life of the city. In Timbuktu, he says, there are numerous judges, physicians, and clergymen, all of whom receive good salaries from the king. There is a great demand for books in manuscripts imported from Barbary. More profit is made from the book trade than from any other line of business. The king, of course, was Askia the Great. While Gao was the political capital of the Songhai Empire, Timbuktu was the cultural capital. Many of the students from Timbuktu, Gao, and Jen were sent to Muslim universities in North Africa, Spain and Asia. In addition, many learned men, regardless of their nationality, were summoned to stay in the celebrated city of Timbuktu, where they were allocated money for their learning. To unite his empire, Askia intertwined the royal families by marriage. Du Bois says, the highest officials of the Slate were chosen from the royal family or married its princesses, as were the principal military chiefs, forming a dynastic aristocracy of the greatest importance to national unity. For better administrative organization, Askia established 4 viceroys in his empire, one in the east, around Lake Chad, another in the north, around Timbuktu and Gao, a third in the northwest and a fourth in the southwest. Because Songhai government was strong, Askia was able to control trade. He built a merchant fleet and a war fleet to facilitate trade in the ports and canals he built on the Niger River and its branches. As a result, the economy and trade developed with tremendous boom. The city of Jen became a crucible of internal trade, Timbuktu of international trade. For the first time, the Portuguese established trade on the west coast of Africa in 1418. During Askia's lifetime, North African and Portuguese ships arrived at the port of Songhai at Cabra in the central Niger. To perpetuate and facilitate trade, Askia standardized the system of weights and measures. Highway robbery was not tolerated. Anyone found guilty of this flagrant act incurred the heaviest punishment. During the reign of Askia I, his son, Askia Musa, defeated his father again and expelled him. Years later, with the help of another son, Ismail, he returned to Gao, the capital. After reigning for 35 years, he died in 1538. Although there was much debauchery among Askia's descendants, the strong government he established ensured their survival for many years. Final chaos came to Songhai when the Moors invaded the country in 1591. The Moors came to acquire riches, they paid a terrible price for their predatory exploits. Some writers have estimated that 23,000 Moors perished in one way or another in the military campaigns against Songhai. After 2 decades, the Moors withdrew their military forces from Songhai in 1018. Basil Davidson says this about Songhai, but if their invasion cost the Moroccans far more than it was worth, it cost Songhai its place in history. Because it demolished the unity and administrative organization of the state, and although it left Timbuktu and Gao and Jen as considerable cities, robbed this civilization of its vitality. From that time on, says the Chronicle, the Tariq, everything changed. Danger replaced security, poverty replaced wealth. Peace gave way to distress, disasters, and violence. After the Moors withdrew from the Sudan, the Portuguese, French and English established colonies and took over the mineral resources of these countries. Chapter 6. The final dispersion of the Black Jews from Africa. Primitive North Africa. Many scholars call the inhabitants of North Africa Berbers, but I won't. I don't like this word Berber. First of all, it is not a native word of Africa, so it is misleading. The Greeks and Romans called the peoples from North Africa Berbers, meaning barbarians. However, the peoples of this region have their own names. The impartial Greek historian Herodotus, may the honor be granted to him, gives the original names of the tribes of North Africa. Beginning with Egypt and extending to the Atlantic Ocean, they are Adamakidi, Gilligami, Asbiti, Oskizi, Kabalians, Nazamonians, Numidians, Silai, Garamantians, Makak, Jindanks, Lolophagi, Maclians, Ausians, Troglodytes, Zavetians, Byzantians, Atarantians, and the Atlanteans. Herodotus says that there are 4 nations in Africa, 2 are indigenous, Ethiopians and Libyans. The Phoenicians and the Greeks were newcomers. Herodotus considered all the tribes of North Africa to be Libyans and all the Africans below the Sahara to be Ethiopians. These are their 2 indigenous nations in Africa. The original inhabitants of North Africa were the Hamites. These Hamites were black like the Egyptians, and this point has been proved by Herodotus. Since most of the history in the Western world has been distorted, it becomes necessary for me to explain some of these distortions. Says Heinrich Barth, a European writer, the inhabitants of Wallata are a mixed race of blacks and whites. Now, the question is, who does he include as his whites? Barth continues, the whites are Berbers and Arabs. These Berbers and Arabs were not white in ancient times. On what basis does he call them white? The obvious reason is that he wants to attribute ancient advanced civilization to the white race to perpetuate the philosophy of white supremacy. Many Negroes have straight noses and thin lips. Negroes possessing these qualities are said to have a white morphology, form. Joseph Williams says the following about West African Negroes: in most mixed groups of Negroes a Songhua can be identified at first sight. Their skin is black like theirs, certainly, but nothing in their mask informs their well-known features. The nose of the Songhua is straight and long, pointed instead of flat, the lips are comparatively thin, and the mouth broad instead of prominent and wide, while the eyes are deeply set and straight in their sockets. A cursory glance shows that the profile resembles that of the European. Some European writers even go into Blackest Africa and divide blacks according to the shape of their noses and lips. Williams continues, the Songhai, although black-skinned and woolly-haired, often Caucasian in appearance. There are many colored people in the United States with straight noses and thin lips, even as black as tar, and Europeans do not classify these colored people as belonging to the white race. After extensive research, my conclusion is this: some European writers have classified certain tribes in Africa and Asia as belonging to the white race. They do so whenever it is psychologically advantageous, to inflate their ego and give them a certain degree of self-esteem. A prominent place in Afro-Asian history. Not only the peoples of Africa and Asia were black in ancient times, but also the European lands of the Mediterranean. The Canaanites and Phoenicians in Africa. The language called Hebrew Phoenician or Canaanite was used in the lands called Phoenicia, Palestine, or Canaan for over 1,000 years before the Arameans, Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, came to Canaan. The Israelites lost their Aramaic language and adopted the Hebrew speech of the Canaanites. Hebrew Phoenician merchants from the cities of Sidon and Tyre controlled trade along the Mediterranean coasts for over 1,000 years before economic treaties were made with the Israelites. The Hebrew-speaking Phoenicians, Canaanites. They established their largest city, Carthage, in Tunisia, North Africa, all Canaanites were black. Before the Phoenicians established their colony, Carthage, in Africa, many Hebrew-speaking Canaanites had migrated through North Africa. A Tosefta, citing an older source, says that when Joshua approached Canaan, he told the inhabitants that they had three choices: they could leave the country, or they could sue for peace, or they could make war against him. The Girgashites, among others, preferred to withdraw to Africa. The Tosefta goes on to say that the Amorites, the Cadmeans, the Kenites and the Kenites, some of whom figure among the founders of Carthage, also went to Africa. These traditions date back to a time when communication between Africa and Phoenicia was continuous. The proper names Gilgash and Kenaz are often found in Carthaginian and Phoenician inscriptions. The Talmud tells that the Canaanites of Africa asked Alexander the Great to return their country, which had been taken from their ancestors by Joshua ben Nun. These traditions have been ratified by the Fathers of the Church. Thus, St. Jerome quotes the Talmud to support his claim that the Girgashites established colonies in Africa, and St. Augustine designates the natives of Africa as Canaanites. The prophet Isaiah 19 verse 18 says that 5 cities in Africa will speak the language of Canaan. We must not forget that the Israelites have been involved in trading ventures, activities and migration since Solomon's treaty with the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians established their metropolis, Carthage, in the 9th century BC. In time they conquered neighboring tribes from Libya to the Atlantic Ocean, spreading their Hebrew Phoenician language and culture in all directions. The Hebrew Phoenician language and culture were invigorated and reinforced by the deportation and migration of the energetic black Hebrews from Palestine. Ptolemy Soter of Egypt conquered Syria and Phoenicia, deporting over 100,000 Hebrews. The Persian king, Cambyses, had previously sanctioned the settlement of the Hebrews in Egypt. During the Macaque Wars, thousands of Hebrews became slaves and exiles. Ptolemy Lathyrus captured 10,000 slaves from the Sea of Galilee region. The Egyptian kings Psamtik I and Psamtik II used Israelite garrisons on the Egyptian borders near Libya. Wars with Rome forced hundreds of thousands more to escape to North Africa. During the Punic Wars and afterward, North Africa contained a large Hebrew population. This Hebrew population converted and intermarried with Canaanites and native Africans. The city and the language of Hannibal. In the ruins of Carthage, archaeologists have found some 4,000 inscriptions in the ancient Canaanite language. According to Nahum Slouch, these inscriptions date back to the time of Nehemiah, Simon the Just, Hannibal and Hasdrubal. Slouch says, and the most valuable thing of all is that we have rediscovered the ancient language and writing of Canaan, the rich and idiomatic speech of a city that once had 700,000 inhabitants. And we, the Hebrew writers, who write and feel in our biblical language, have quickly recognized that this renamed Phoenician language is nothing more and nothing less than Hebrew, a pure Hebrew dialect, almost the same as that spoken in the country of Israel. The population of Carthage came from Palestine and its civilization was of Hebrew origin. Slouch is certain, after much research, that the language Hannibal spoke and in which he led his troops was Hebrew. There is evidence that the Carthaginians had a high priesthood and their ceremonies and sacrifices were similar to the rituals found in the book of Leviticus. According to some inscriptions, the Hebrew tribes of Asher and Zebulun were in Carthage from the founding of the city. Many inscriptions were excavated in the ruins of Carthage containing many Hebrew names such as Job, Josh and Joel. It is said that the city of Tunis is neither Arab nor European. Tunis is a Jewish city. Nowhere else does the Jew feel at home as in Tunisia. Slouch puts it beautifully, and indeed, Tunisia, heir to the Hebrew Charter, is the eternal city of the Jews. For, like the phoenix, the Jews have risen again and again from the ashes of their destruction. After the sack of Carthage, the Jews found themselves back in Carthage under Roman rule. After the Byzantine persecutions, they fled into the desert. And even under Arab persecution, the Jews managed to survive catastrophe after catastrophe. The Moorish Empire. Within 100 years, the black Arabs had completely invaded North Africa in the 7th century. At this time, the Arabs were black, they had not mixed much with other peoples. The Arabs did penetrate into the interior of the Sahara Desert, but only in small numbers, so the territory remained basically African. Muley Idris, a descendant of Ali, Muhammad's son-in-law, brought northern Morocco under his control in the late 7th century. His son and successor was Idris II, who founded the Kingdom of Fez. At this time, in the land of Spain, the black Jews were being persecuted and many had fled to Morocco for refuge. As a result of this persecution, the Moroccan Jews and the Moors planned to invade Spain with the help of the Spanish Jews. In the meantime, the plot was discovered and the Jews of Spain suffered for their intentions. At the beginning of the 8th century, the Mohammedans of Morocco, united with the black Jews, made what we call an amphibious landing at Gibraltar. This invasion was successful. Nahum Slouch says that the first to set foot on the soil of Spain was General Tarif, a Jew from the tribe of Simeon, 15, in whose honor the island of Tarifa, opposite Tangier, was named. However, the Rock of Gibraltar, formerly known as the Pillars of Hercules, received its new name from the great Moorish conqueror Jebel al-Tariq, meaning the Mountain of Tariq. Here is a vivid account of the conquering Moors described by a writer sympathetic to Christian Spain. The reins of their horses were like fire, their faces black as pitch, their eyes shining like lighted candles, their horses were swift as leopards, and their riders fiercer than a wolf in the fold at night. The noble Goths were cut to pieces in an hour, faster than the tongue can tell. Oh, fate! Less Spain. These black Moors ruled parts of Spain for over 700 years. During this time, the Moors developed the greatest cultural civilization known in all of Europe. In the latter half of the 11th century, a powerful dynasty of sultans emerged from Senegal, West Africa, known as the Almoravids. They established their capital in Marrakesh, Morocco, and became the masters of a new empire that included Senegal, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and southern Spain. This empire was even larger than Western Europe. At this time the first general of the Senegalese was Abu Bakr, who was supplanted by a stronger general, Yusuf ben Takfin. Yusuf's first goal was to build an elegant capital, with wonderful houses, a palace with marble floors and beautiful flower beds. The city he built, Marrakesh or City of Morocco, became the name of this country. As Moorish power declined in Spain, Yusuf crossed the Mediterranean to Spain to reinforce Moorish control. He took with him 15,000 black soldiers and defeated Alfonso VI with his 70,000 Christians in the Battle of Salaka. During the Almoravid Wars, the greatest commander and hero of Spanish literature was killed. His name was Rodrigo Diaz de Bivar, better known as El Cid. The Moors were known for more than just conquest. While the rest of Europe was in a state of ignorance, the Spanish people took advantage of the knowledge of the Black Moors. During the Moorish rule, many other capitals of Europe were mere villages, but Córdoba, the capital of Spain, was a flourishing city. It is said that after dark, one could travel for miles in Córdoba and not pass a street that was not lit by street lights. When a person went out after dark in London, he had to carry a candle or lantern to light his way, and he had to wear high shoes to walk through the thick mud that often covered the roads. While many Europeans dressed in furs and coarse clothing, the Moors wore silk, linen and cotton fabrics. They also washed in the 900 baths of Córdoba. The palace of the Moorish Sultan or Caliph was far greater in beauty, comfort, and wealth than any of the castles of medieval kings. Highly polished marble was used in its construction. The sides of the walls were patiently carved, and the floors were made with various decorations called mosaics. It is said that the Moors were masters at mosaic work. The Arabs and Moors were known not only for their craftsmanship, but also for their science. Most of the knowledge of ancient Greece and the Near East was unknown in Europe during the medieval period. The Arabs had come into close contact with Greek and Persian culture. The Arabs did not destroy this culture, but brought it to North Africa. In southern Spain there were many famous Moorish and Hebrew scholars. Black Jews, like the Arabs and Moors, made a great contribution not only to Afro-Asian, but also to European civilization. The Jews of the East knew Greek and Syriac. They helped translate the works of Greek philosophers into Arabic. In turn, these works were studied by the Arabic-speaking Jews of North Africa and Spain and translated into Hebrew. The Black Jews of the Moorish Kingdom of Spain translated these works into Latin, and from Spain the sciences of the Greeks and the Afro-Asiatic peoples were transmitted to Western Europe. Morisco scholars made spectacular contributions to philosophy, medicine, mathematics, chemistry, astronomy, and botany. Muslim doctors were not servants, but masters of their science. They established colleges and universities for the rich. There were also many free schools. There were excellent libraries. The learned Caliph of Cordoba in the 10th century sent out all over the world in search of books. This Caliph's library contained more than 400,000 volumes. The normal life of the Moors was based on agriculture, manufacturing, and trade. Rice, cotton, peaches, oranges, and lemons were introduced into Spain by the Moors. Silk culture was introduced into Spain by the Moors. The Moors had fine pottery, tiles, silks, velvet, brocades, jewelry, and ornamental leather products. The Moorish civilization had a gigantic effect on Portugal and Spain. This is the reason why these two countries were the first European powers to emerge after the Middle Ages. Over time, the Moors were driven south. In the 11th century, El Cid conquered the great Moorish city of Valencia. Much later, in the 13th century, the King of Castile conquered Seville and Cordoba. Afterwards, the Moors were pushed back to a small region called Granada. Prominent black Jews. Some of the most prominent black Jews of Portugal, Spain, and North Africa were Hasdai ibn Shaprat, who lived from 925 to 975. He made his career as a physician and continued to be interested in the medical profession, especially drugs. In time he became physician to the Khalifa. Later he gave official advice on diplomatic matters. He remained at the center of the Hebrew scholars whom he supported. He associated with Moses ben Hanok, representative of the Babylonian academies, who initiated the foundation of Talmudic learning in Spain. Sodi again was born in 892, in the district of Fayyum, in Upper Egypt. He was a scholar of the Bible and the Talmud, of Arabic and Hebrew literature, and of Greek and Arabic philosophy. He was one of the first Hebrew grammarians and philosophical commentators on the Bible. Sodia composed special works on many subjects, such as philosophy, astronomy, geography, theology, mathematics, music, poetry, chronology, and philology. Isaac of Fez, Morocco, or Alfasi, so called because he was originally from the city of Fez, lived during the 11th century. Although the first major academy was founded by Moses ben Hanok in Cordoba, the true foundations of the Spanish Talmudic tradition were laid by Alfasi. Alfasi's interest was in Talmudic law, especially that which was vital to the Hebrews of the dispersion. Samuel ibn Nagdala lived between 993 and 1056. He started out as a shopkeeper. His acquisition of knowledge in languages, mathematics, and philosophy was extraordinary. Because Samuel had a beautiful handwriting, he was appointed secretary to the Grand Vizier. In this position he was able to put his wisdom and knowledge into practice. When the vizier died, Samuel succeeded him as advisor to the Moorish king of Granada. On several occasions he was appointed head of the Moorish armies of Granada. Samuel ibn Nagdala was also respected in Jewish circles. The king of Granada elevated him to the rank of Nagid, that is, prince or leader of the Jews. Moses Maimonides was the most prominent black Jew during the Middle Ages. He is known as Rambam, Rabknu Moshe ben Maimon. Moses was born in Cordoba on March 30, 1135, the eve of Passover. His father, Maimon, was descended from a great family of scholars and religious leaders. His family tree traces back to Rabbi Judah the Prince, composer of the Mishmah, to the royal house of David. Although the Talmud and the rabbis were the main subjects of study of Maimonides also devoted time to the sciences taught and propounded by the ancient Greeks and medieval Arabs. He was trained by Hebrew and Moorish teachers, and in a short time he learned natural sciences, mathematics, medicine, metaphysics, philosophy, and logic. In 1145, when Moses was 10 years old, Abdullah ibn Tumat, a religious fanatic, founded the Almohad dynasty. The Almohads, who proclaimed a religion of absolute monotheism, managed, after many battles, to expel the Almoravids, black Moors from the mountains of Morocco, and established their own dominion over the Moorish Empire. The Almohads led a reign of terror and persecution not only against Judaism and Christianity, but also against sectarianism in Islam. The Almohads showed their intolerance towards other religions. They banned the existence of churches and synagogues. Jews and Christians were given only one alternative, Islam or death. Abdulmumin, who succeeded Abdullah ibn Tumat, allowed heretics to leave his country. Christian exiles found asylum in northern Spain. Jews found it difficult to find a safe place, and many of them died by the sword as martyrs of their religion. Some of the Jews converted to Islam as a disguise, and remained faithful to their own faith, practicing Judaism in secret. Towards the middle of the 12th century, when Maimonides was 13, the Almohads crossed the Mediterranean into Spain and established their power in Andalusia. In the late spring of that year, the Almohads invaded the city of Córdoba and instituted a reign of terror and persecution. The magnificent synagogues were destroyed, the Talmudic schools of Seville and Lucena were closed, and non-believers in Islam, Jews and Christians, were given the alternative of Islam, expulsion, or death. Because of all this unrest and social unrest, Moses Maimonides' family decided to leave that inhospitable land and sail across the Mediterranean to Morocco in North Africa. They stayed in the city of Fez for about 5 years and then traveled to Palestine. Since the environment was not conducive to learning, Moses moved to Egypt. Moses Maimonides continued his medical studies. His fame as a physician spread throughout Egypt and beyond. Moses is said to have been offered a position as physician to King Richard the Lionheart, leader of the Third Crusade. When Moses was about 50 years old, he was appointed by Alfred Hel, the vizier of Egypt, as his own medical advisor and was given a place among the royal physicians. Moses was also a great leader and judge of the Egyptian Jewish community. His son followed in his footsteps, religiously and secularly, becoming the leader of the Jewish communities and the Sultan's physician. Other prominent black Jews from Spain were poets such as Salomon ibn Gabirol, Moses ibn Ezra, and Judah ha-Levi. The expulsion of the Jews from Spain and Portugal. It was the year 1492, January 2nd, when the Moorish fortress of Granada surrendered to the armies of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. For the first time since 711, all of Spain was in Christian hands. The decree expelling the Jews from Spain was signed on March 31st, in one of the halls of the Great Alhambra, the palace of the Moorish kings of Granada. The reason given for the expulsion of the Jews was that they were thought to corrupt the Marranos, Jewish converts to Christianity, by privately encouraging them to disloyalty to Christianity. The ultimatum given to the Jews expired on August 1, 1492. But the last group of Jews did not leave until August 2, 1492. This date is a strange coincidence. That day was the 9th of AV, the fast day commemorating the destruction of the first and second temples. Professor Alan H. Godby says that the reign of the last Jewish king of Ghana ended in 1492. To satisfy Queen Isabella of Spain, King Manical of Portugal issued a royal decree expelling Jews and Moors from his country in 1496. The Jews who were expelled from Spain and Portugal dispersed along the Mediterranean coasts. It is estimated that over 100,000 Jews left Spain and Portugal during the persecutions and expulsion. Some of these Jews went to Northern Europe, Italy, and Turkey, but the majority went to the Muslim countries of North and West Africa. These black Jews naturally went to African countries above all, because there was less persecution and they could easily disguise themselves among the blacks. R.H.M. Clues gives a graphic description of the Portuguese Jew Baruch Spinoza, of medium height, good features, somewhat black skin, curly black hair, long eyebrows of the same color, so that one could tell from his appearance that he was descended from Portuguese Jews. When the Jews were expelled from Spain, about 100,000 entered Portugal. They were allowed to enter on condition that they paid the poll tax, with the understanding that they would leave the country within 8 months. Also at that time the king was obliged to take the Jews wherever they wanted at the end of 8 months. When time expired, many Jews were stranded because the king did not provide enough ships in time. All the black Jews left behind were deprived of their freedom and sold into slavery. During the reign of João II, or John II, 700 black Hebrew children were ruthlessly torn from their parents in Portugal and transported to the island of São Tomé, off the west coast of Africa. This island is located near Nigeria, Cameroon, and Gabon. Alan II. Godhay says that the Portuguese founded the island of São Tomé in 1171. In the year 1484, King John II of Portugal, who reigned from 1481 to 1495, offered the Jews of his kingdom the choice of being baptized or settling on sand during the reign of John II, many Jews were sent to this island, Judeos, as the Portuguese called them. Serious, reserved and wealthy, who had in their hands most of the trade. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to settle on the West African coast. They arrived first as traders and then as conquerors and slavers. Later in this work, more details will be given about black Jews in the Portuguese possessions in West Africa. Let us now return to the Jews of North Africa. With the influx of tens of thousands of black Jews from Spain and Portugal seeking refuge in African ports, Morocco received a large share. Before this date, many Jewish tribes were entrenched in Fez, the Atlas, and the desert. In Morocco there was a revival of Moorish and Jewish learning in all fields. The Hebrew Academy in Fez competed with that of Kairouan in Algeria. There were many debates and conferences between the wise men and scholars of these schools. Elder Danite, a Hebrew from the Jewish kingdom of Ghana, visited these schools in the 9th century. There was a celebrated Hebrew school at Sijilmassa, in the desert south of Fez. The school at Sijilmassa produced many illustrious scholars. There were grammarians, teachers of Talmudic law, poets, and philologists. This period of Jewish scholarship came to an end when the fanatical Almohads, Unitarians, went to war in AD 11 and 15. And destroyed the city of Sijilmassa. This reign of terror was carried out against all non-Muslims. Regarding the destruction of Sijilmassa, Ibn Ezra writes, I say, let there be mourning for the community of Sijilmassa, city of great scholars and sages. She sees her light covered with shadows, the pillars of the Talmuds were smashed, the temple of the law was destroyed and the Mislama was trampled. There are many Jewish tribes and settlements throughout Morocco and the Sahara Desert. The 8 Musa, or Beni Musa, sons of Moses, are one of the spectacular Jewish tribes. Leo Africanus, a converted Moorish Jew, states that the Jews of North Africa are of a hybrid quality. They have proselytized and intermarried with Greeks, Vandals, Romans, Spaniards, and Portuguese. Jews intermarried with the Greeks when they established their colony in Libya, called Cyrenaica. When the Greeks established their colony in Libya, called Cyrenaica, there was some intermarriage between Jews, Romans, and Vandals when the latter invaded North Africa, and before the Jews were expelled from Spain and Portugal there was some intermarriage. Taking into account all this interbreeding, many North African Jews still retain much of their colored features. According to Maurice Fishberg, quoted by Alan Godby, he was unable to distinguish a Jew from a Mohammedan when he passed through the streets of Algiers, Constantine, a city in North Africa, and Tunis. It is remarkable that among the non-Jewish natives many Jews of the Negroid type are seen. Fishberg visited Africa in the early 20th century. There are black Jews living in the multitude of oases of the Sahara Desert. Nahum Slouch, the white Jewish rabbi, visited these North African and Saharan Jews at the turn of the century. Slouch obtained his information about these Jews from 3 sources, from the historical records of the Arabs, from the oral traditions of the inhabitants of the Sahara, and from archaeological evidence excavated from the ruins of ancient Jewish cities in the Sahara and Sudan, dating back to the 13th century. About halfway along Algeria's eastern border, there are large settlements of black Jews at a place called Wargla, says Slouch. Jews were in Wargla as early as 620 AD, according to Godby. Again, Godby says, in the oasis of Wargla in Algeria, 350 miles from the Mediterranean, there is a colony of Jews as black as the Negroes. In the Garian section of Libya, not far from Wargla, there are the troglodyte Jews. It is said that the Jews went to the strongholds of the Nafusa range on account of Roman and Arab persecution. Godby quotes 2. S. Cowper as saying that the Jews of the city of Tripoli claim to have emigrated from Garian. These Jews built underground synagogues and subterranean houses. Slouch visited the strongholds of these troglodyte Jews early in this century. The Jews had built 3- and 4-story compartments underground with a population of 30,000 people. Godby says that Hessa, Warteg visited their towns of Beni Abbas, Jebel Nafasa, Ud Abbas, Tigrina, Jebel Ifrin. They had shops, warehouses, schools, and synagogues, all underground. The achievements of these Jews demonstrate what a persecuted society can do under adverse conditions. These Jews had a foundation on which to build. Unlike other persecuted peoples, they had their history, their culture, their laws, their language, and their skills. Between Wargla and the Garian, there is a Jewish town called Tigrina. Here, too, the Jews have built underground compartments. Nahum Slouch says that he was guided to an ancient synagogue which was located underground. At that time he made an extensive observation of the town, which contained 20 underground courtyards and its 700 inhabitants. Furthermore, he found there a young man who taught Hebrew. When Slouch was in the town for about an hour, the men had just returned from the market. Slouch says they are all of a fine, dark type. The rabbi was descended from Jews who had emigrated from Morocco. The rabbi, at that time, informed Slouch of the fact that there existed in the district many vestiges of deserted Jewish towns and now abandoned cemeteries. The Jews of this country have handed down an oral tradition that in ancient times they formed the majority of the population, but that epidemics, wars, and frequent conversions to Islam have reduced their numbers. On one occasion Slouch met a Jewish itinerant merchant from Nafusa who had just arrived from Fezzan. This Jew had traveled all the routes of the Sahara. He assured Slouch that there were other Jews at least in eastern Sudan, Chad, Sudan, and Ethiopia. A black-skinned population whom some call the Felici and who are generally known among the Tuaregs as the Krit. They observe the Sabbath and are known to be of Jewish origin. Many of the tribes of the Sahara and the Sudan are Muslim by religion but of Hebrew nationality. Nahum Slouch says, you can find numbers of these Islamized Jews everywhere. They are among the nomads of Algeria, the Smul, the Hunanshah, the Traores, the Marsmata, the Mwajirin, the Kabyles, the Tuat. You will find them among the Ureshfana, the Gariani, the Brahmi in Tripoli. You will find them in the south of Morocco among the powerful clans of the Dagatans, who control the routes to the Sudan and the south. They are not Jews by religion, but they are conscious of their Hebrew origin. They are friendly to Jewish traders. Often the Jew is the only communication between these tribes and the outside world. The Dagatun Jews are scattered in clans throughout many oases along the caravan routes of the Sahara and the Sudan. Godby says that the word Dagatun means traders. They are found near Timbuktu and hundreds of kilometers to the north. They are also found east of Timbuktu and Gao. The two main factors that motivated black Jews to enter North Africa were trade and persecution, and these two factors also drove them to migrate to Central Africa known as Sudan. West African Jews during the slave trade. The black Jews who migrated to the Sudan from the north converged with the Jews who migrated from the eastern Sudan to the countries of the Niger River. It is a known fact that Jews and Judaism were in Africa 1500 years before Islam, and that wherever the Arabs went there were Jews. The black Jews guided the Arabs and the Moors in Spain and acted as interpreters. When the Muslims entered the Sahara, they found the black Jews stationed on all the trade routes, and I can safely say that where Mohammedanism prevails today in the Sudan, Judaism had been dominant. There is much evidence, and much more to be revealed by scholars, that there existed before and after the slave trade many Jewish tribes, colonies, and kingdoms in West Africa. The Moorish writer Leo Africanus informs us of the past existence of a medieval Hebrew state called Kamnuria or Kanuria. Its two main cities were Kamnuri, obviously its capital, and Negira, and this state was situated north of the Senegal River. According to this Moorish Jew, this Hebrew state of Black Africa had disappeared in his time. There are two reasons for the ruin of this kingdom. The intense sandstorms of the Sahara Desert caused droughts and the cities became deserted. Uninhabitable, the migration of the Fulas or Fulbi to the west. The Kanui called the Fulas, Felata. These Fulas transmigrated all over Sudan from the Nile to Senegal. The Kanui Jews are now found in central Sudan along trails hundreds of miles north, south, east and west of Lake Chad, where they migrated from Senegal. Some scholars have concluded that when the Jewish kingdom of Ghana fell, many of the Hebrew tribes established settlements among the African tribes throughout Central and Western Africa. Thus, the Moorish writer Al-Edrasi from Andalusia, Spain, wrote in the early 12th century about the powerful Hebrew colony of Lam-Lam. Lam-Lam was situated about 200 miles west of Timbuktu. Hebrew merchants then monopolized the trade that was concentrated in Timbuktu. Lam-Lam was entirely Jewish and waged wars to maintain its control of the trade. F. Drissy also said that there were only two towns south of the Kingdom of Ghana and continues, according to the accounts of the inhabitants of this country, the inhabitants are Jews. When they reached the age of puberty, they were branded on the face or at least on the temples with fire, leaving identifying marks. All the dwellings in their countries were built on the bank of a river that flowed into the Nile. Drisi was referring to the Niger River. The belief at the time was that the Niger formed an upper section of the Nile. The African Black Hebrews had settlements not only in the interior of Africa, but also had communities on the west coast of Africa, from Morocco to Angola. In the year 1856, Dr. J. I. Wilson wrote his History of West Africa. It conveys to us the composite religious culture of some of the inhabitants of Senegambia, or Senegal, and Guinea. In Senegal, he said, there is a complete mixture of paganism, Judaism, and Mohammedanism, and it is difficult to say which of the three occupies the most promising place, or exercises the greatest influence upon the character of the people. However, the feeling of the inhabitants regarding this multi-religious mix was that the combination of the three religions promoted the well-being of all. How can we rationalize and explain the mixture of paganism, Judaism, and Mohammedanism? How can we rationalize and explain the mixture of paganism, Judaism, and Mohammedanism near the ruins of the medieval Jewish kingdom of Cammuria? It is obvious to researchers that after the dismemberment of the Hebrew kingdoms of Ghana, Cammuria, and Iamlam, Black Jews migrated to remote regions inland and on the coast. These Hebrews were then subjected to the pressure of Muslim propaganda and pagan influence, which gave rise to what is known as cultural diffusion. If we recall what Slouch said, many Jews became Muslims but still retained their Jewish origin. Wilson also informs us that in northern Guinea there is a conglomeration of Judaism and paganism combined, and in southern Guinea there is a combination of Judaism, paganism, and some traces of Christianity. In northern Guinea, or Portuguese Guinea, Judaism is more widely practiced. Some of the more prominent rites are purifications, the observance of new moons, a designated period of mourning for the dead, during which they carry sackcloths. Hebrew rituals are characterized by the use of cloths and ashes, bloody animal sacrifices, with the careful sprinkling of the blood on doorposts and altars, the division of the tribes into different families, often into 12 parts, the 12 tribes of Israel, formal processions, circumcision and various other practices, probably of Hebrew origin. Some of these rituals, especially circumcision, might have been derived from the Muslims, but we are forced to consider the whole set of Hebrew cultural traces which are indicative of the Hebrew religion. Wilson says, although the natives of Africa preserve these external rites and ceremonies with the greatest tenacity, they have little or no knowledge of their origin, or of the particular object which they are intended to commemorate. Many of them are performed to ward off some threatened evil, or to secure some coveted good. But in the great majority of cases they are celebrated merely from custom, and the only reason given for observing them is that their ancestors did the same before them. It stands to reason that if your ancestors observed these Hebrew rails, they were surely Hebrews. It is written, they said, "Come, let us cut them off from being a nation, so that the name of Israel may no longer be in their memory." Like the Black Jews of America, some of the Jews of Guinea do not remember their original nationality. The deplorable ignorance is attributed to various causes: the fall of the Hebrew kingdoms, the lack of communication with Jewish educational centers, intense persecution, and the deliberate erasure from the minds of their true nationality. Thus, Nahum Slouch said this about the Islamized Jews he met: in most cases, these Jews by race and Muslims by faith try to hide their origin, which has become a burden for them. In another example, the persecution of the Black Jews in Portugal was so ruthless and frequent that Cecil Roth tells us that the Jews did not divulge the secret of their religion to their children until they reached the age of reason. The Hebrew religion is such that if you renounce your religion, you will end up renouncing your nationality. Sociologists and psychologists know, and history has proven, that if you renounce your culture and nationality for a long period of time, you will totally forget it through a process of assimilation. Black Jews came to Africa not only by land but also by sea. As we remember, in 1484 King John of Portugal deported a large number of Black Jews to the African island of São Tomé. The island of São Tomé, near Nigeria and Cameroon, was discovered by the Portuguese in 1471 and established as a penal colony. Jews who did not accept baptism were sent to this island. It is obvious that the Jews were deported to São Tomé not only to inflict punishment on them, but King John's ulterior motive was to establish a trading base with sophisticated Black Jews in his growing empire in Africa. Over time, Black Jews from Portugal and Black Jews from Portuguese colonial possessions became known as Black Portuguese. They were called Black Portuguese because they were born in Portugal and knew Portuguese history, culture, and language. As already mentioned, King John XXXIV of Portugal provided ships to deport the Jews to any country they wished. However, unscrupulous Portuguese captains demanded as much money as they could from the Jews and dumped their human cargo at various places on the West African coast. As a result, Alan Godbey writes that Windsord met blacks in Guinea, West Africa, who called themselves Portuguese and claimed to be of Portuguese descent. Reed wrote his book in 1864. In another instance, Daniel P. Mannix writes that Captain Cutler, a Boston slave trader, was barbarously murdered, with 2 of his sailors, by a community of Portuguese Negroes settled near the mouth of the Sierra Leone River. The Portuguese were the first Europeans to trade on the coast of West Africa and to establish large-scale colonies. The Canary Islands were discovered by the Portuguese in 1341, ceded to Spain by Papal Bull in 1344. Senegal was discovered by the Portuguese in the 15th century, and the first settlements are believed to have been by Portuguese Negroes. The mouth of the Gambia River was discovered by the Portuguese in the 15th century. Sierra Leone was first visited by the Portuguese in 1462, Guinea was discovered by the Portuguese in 1446, the island of São Tomé was discovered by the Portuguese in 1471, the new inhabitants were Black Jews deported here in 1484, Black Jews migrated to the coast of Angola from São Tomé between 1484 and 1499. White Portuguese missionaries arrived in Angola in 1560. But white settlers did not establish a community until 1575. Let us now return to the Jews of the island of São Tomé. Scholars are not certain of the exact number of Jews deported to this island. It is certain that the number is in the thousands and perhaps in the tens of thousands. Continued research is needed in African Hebrew history, especially in the excavation of the ruined Hebrew cities of Africa. When this gigantic work is completed, I believe that the evidence will reveal information that will astonish mankind. I believe that a greater number of Black Jews were taken to the west coast of Africa than some writers admit. By the edict of King Manuel of Portugal in 1496, banishing the Jews from Portugal, all Jews were to be out of Portugal by October 1497. However, considering this matter, he decided to Christianize the Jews, fearing the loss of a valuable population. He wanted to continue to use their knowledge and services. He came to the conclusion that the only way to tolerate the Jews in his country was to force them to adopt the Christian faith. In March 1497, an order was proclaimed throughout Portugal that all Hebrew children between the ages of 4 and 14 should be brought to baptism. All parents who did not bring their children voluntarily were violently taken away by officials and forced to be baptized. Cecil Roth writes, "Scenes of unspeakable horror were witnessed as they were led away by the royal bailiffs. These did not obey their instructions with the greatest attention, and frequently seized young men and women as young as 20 years old. In many cases parents smothered their children in their parting embrace. In others they threw them into wells to save them from the disgrace of apostasy, and then committed suicide. Sometimes even old people were dragged into churches and forcibly baptized by overzealous fanatics. Horrendous conditions like these, and much worse, forced many Jews to secretly escape the country. These Black Jews went to the Portuguese colonial possessions in West Africa. 38. Let us remember that the Portuguese colonies in West Africa were Guinea, the island of São Tomé, Senegal, Angola, and some islands near the African coast. During the persecutions in Portugal, thousands of Jews left the country. The Jews left the country in such large numbers that in 1199 and 1531, the kings published a decree prohibiting the new Christians, Black Jews, from leaving Portugal without special permits. At this time, many Jews became Christians out of fear. Many of them were known as secret Jews, who practiced Judaism secretly under the guise of Christianity. Some writers call these Jews nominal Christians, Jews who are Christians in name only, but who practice Judaism in secret. Despite all the prejudices against the Black Jews of Portugal, they stood out in all trades, skills, professions, and businesses. The wealth of the Jews was enormous. Portugal is a small country, about the size of the state of Florida, yet in the year 1610, Jews alone were worth 80,000 ducats. The Jews dominated trade and export, so naturally the black Jew was engaged in trade in many parts of Africa, after having fled from Portugal. The Black Jews of Angola. In the country called Gabon, near the Congo, there were black Jews known as the Bavumbu. Some writers call them by various names such as Mavambo, Mayomba, Mayunaiba, and Mavumbu. Abbé Proyart, a French writer, says that these few occupied the coast of Longo between the Congo River and the Muni River in Gabon. In 1770 their country began about 60 miles from the coast and extended north of the Congo about 200 miles. In appearance these black Jews are scarcely distinguishable from other Africans. It has been reported that these Jews practice some divination and magic like the native Africans. They observe, however, some Jewish ceremonies, and live in separate communities, not considering themselves native Africans. Villages of these Jews are situated along the coast of Longo for more than 100 miles, even south of the Congo River. Godby writes that when questioned about their origin, some of these Jews say they emigrated from the south, probably Angola, others from the north, probably Nigeria. Others from the other side of the mountains, perhaps Ethiopia. Like the Portuguese Jews, the Bavumbu Jews were very active in trade. When David Livingstone was in Africa, he discovered a settlement of educated blacks around the year 1847. They were located inland about 200 miles from the coast of Luanda and were known as the Jews of Angola. These black Jews were active in trade, eager to learn, and possessed much knowledge of Portuguese history and law. In their commercial ventures, these Jews penetrated ashore hundreds of miles from the coast and were also known as clerks and writers. Livingstone regarded these Jews as deportees from Portugal. San Pablo de Loanda began, like San Tome, as a penal colony for the punishment of criminals. In Portugal many of these black Jews were considered criminals. It is also said that many of these black Jews from the land of Angola came from the island of San Tome. All available evidence indicates that the Jews of the coast of Angola were marginalized Portuguese Jews. Many black Jews settled in the interior and along the coast of Angola, the Congo, and Gabon. Friedrich Rachel writes that the tribes of the Longo and Cabinda coasts, north of the Congo River, were Christianized at one time. Rachel observed a baptism ceremony followed by circumcision. However, these tribes were of Jewish origin. The Christianity that Rachel saw among them was a disguise. The circumcision practiced among them is of Jewish origin. The Christians of Portugal did not practice circumcision. Indeed, Cecil Roth wrote that circumcision among the Jews of Portugal was virtually an impossibility, its discovery being tantamount to a death sentence. Godby wrote of the Mavumbu Jews on the Longo coast. It appears that the Mavumbu may be the remnant of a much more numerous Judaism which was vigorously attacked by the Portuguese missionaries. The Abbé Proyart records that the nominal Christians, secret Jews, numbered hundreds of thousands. When the Jews were in Spain, Portugal, or in their possessions, colonialists, they disguised themselves as Christians on the outside, but practiced Judaism in secret. Many of these new Christians knew Christian rites better than the old white Christians. In 1517, the papal office authorized the establishment of the Inquisition system in Portugal. The word Inquisition means inquiry or investigation. The Inquisition consisted of a tribunal of religious judges. Its purpose was to investigate and purge heretical Christians, those who questioned certain Christian principles. Although some white Portuguese Christians suffered at the hands of the Inquisition, this system was directed primarily against the new Christians, the secret black Jews. The Inquisitions were persistent, gruesome, and ruthless in their entirety. They intruded into the private affairs of individuals. They intimidated and coerced individuals into informing on their neighbors. They employed a wide variety of horrendous, ongoing tortures, including public spectacles of burning human beings at the stake, and to satisfy their desire to punish heretics, they sought out not only the living but also the innocent. Dead. Garcia de Horta, a Jew from Portugal, was discovered to be a secret Jew. His body was dug up from his grave and burned by the Inquisition. In another case, a Jewish woman named Elvira del Campo was accused and tortured for 2 years to extract a confession. The charges against her were not eating pork and wearing clean clothes on Saturdays. According to this woman, these charges were not heretical practices. She wanted to be clean and pork made her sick. Whenever Christian Jews were able to escape from Spain and Portugal beyond the reach of the Inquisition, they shed the guise of Christianity and practiced Judaism openly, as they did in Turkey. However, the unfortunate new Christians, nominal Christians, or secret Jews, in the Portuguese possessions in West Africa, India, and elsewhere were unable to shed the guise of Christianity. The Inquisition even sent its inquisitorial agents to the Canary Islands, Madeira, Guinea, India, South America, São Tomé, and Angola to hunt for secret Jews. Between 15G1 and 1628, some 3,800 individuals were tried, many of them were Christian Jews from the island of São Tomé. They were accused of holding to Jewish principles. Cecil Roth wrote that Christian Jews emigrated to the Portuguese colony of Angola in West Africa, where agents of the Inquisition were sent to hunt them down in 1626. We can now understand why writers such as Friedrich Ratzel considered the coastal tribes of Ioango and Cabinda to be Christian. These Jews had to maintain a Christian appearance, particularly in the presence of whites. Any European could be an agent of the Inquisition. It is true that many black Jews from Portugal, São Tomé, and Angola who were victims of the Inquisition and Portuguese persecution were sold into the slave trade. This Atlantic slave trade lasted for over 400 years, from 1441 to about 1880 in parts of South America. Some scholars have located black Jews throughout the bend of the Niger River. Among the countries in this territory that have hosted black African Jews are the following: Upper Volta, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Togo, Dahomey, and Nigeria. Joseph Dupters, speaking of the Jews in 1824, says, "The lands occupied by this people cover a wide area, between Massina and Kaby. Massina is located in southern Mali, within the bend of the Niger River, and Kaby is located in the southern part of Ivory Coast. The Jews among the Ashantis. Among the Ashantis of the Gold Coast, Ghana, are Jews who observe many Hebrew customs. They do not light the Sabbath but rest. They celebrate the Jewish New Year, which occurs in September or early October. They use the word Amen at the end of their hymn of thanksgiving. Like the Hebrews of old, they marry only within their tribe. They perform marriages between cousins. Ashantis also observe the laws of impurity after childbirth, the 40th day purification ceremony, the law of menstrual seclusion, and ceremonial ablutions. Ashantis have a breastplate like that of the high priest in ancient Israel, and it is divided into 12 parts, representing the 12 tribes of Israel. They also have the misnefet or headdress, with its gold disc in front, which in ancient Israel bore an inscription, "Holy to the Lord." The Black Jews of Dahomey. Dr. J. Kreppel reported in 1926 that there was a large Hebrew community of Negro Jews in the interior of Dahomey, West Africa. These Hebrews have their own central temple where they sacrifice animals. In their temple are found many laws engraved on tablets which are attached to the walls of the temple. They have a high priest, with a large number of priestly families, whose members go from house to house giving educational and religious instructions to each family in the community. In addition, these Jews have their own Chumash, the 5 books of Moses, written on ancient parchment in Hebrew letters, but they have no other books. The little Judaism they possess was passed down to them by their ancestors. Dr. Krippel says they observe the Sabbath and other Jewish customs, despite pressure from their pagan surroundings. Yoruba Jews of Nigeria. There are black Jews in southern Nigeria whom the native Africans call Imo Yokwam, or strange people, but these black Jews call themselves by the Hebrew name Bnei Ephraim, or sons of Ephraim. These Jews claim that their ancestors immigrated from Morocco, a fact that Godby says is supported by their language, a mixture of Maghrebi Arabic and local black speech. Thus Yubu, father, has become Yaba, mother, in Hebrew is a mother. However, most of their language is similar to that of the black Yorubas around them. The Yorubas have greatly influenced these Jews in their external social life. The crocodile is said to be the sacred animal for customary sacrifices of the Yorubas seem to be the same for the Jews. The claim of these Yoruba Jews is that their ancestors were driven from locality to locality by Muslim persecution. They found no rest even when they reached Timbuktu. Surely the prophecy has been fulfilled, and among these nations you will find no rest, neither will the sole of your foot have any repose, but the Lord will give you there a trembling heart, and failing of eyes, and gloom of mind. These Yoruba Jews were living in the Ondo district when Godby wrote in 1930. This district is 900 miles southeast of Timbuktu. When Godby wrote, they numbered about 2,000 inhabitants in 20 small villages. In terms of their political structure and Hebrew culture, they have 7 hereditary heads of the community. Their leadership is that of a priesthood. They are known to have copies of portions of the Torah, Old Testament, preserved in a most holy place. However, their social life is not controlled by the Torah like many of the Hebrew cultural traits among Ashanti Jews. These black Jews observe certain Jewish customs, among which are the high holy days. High almost every respect these Negro Jews are like the Vortibers, and are scarcely distinguished from them, except by some prominent Hebrew observances. One of the most notable among these Negro Jews was a young man named Bata Kindayamgoza, Ibn Lo-Bagola, who was taken from Widder, Dahomey, to Scotland. After having received 4 years' education from the white man, he returned to his home in Africa. Dr. Alan H. Godby advances the position that the Phoenix Negroes were to be found on the West African coast from Senegal to Angola, and that they, the Jews, were driven to this area from the Central Sudan by Muslim propagandism. Having a knowledge of the Negro Jews in the United States, Dr. Godby came to this conclusion. These facts have a peculiar significance when one considers the presence of Judaism among the American Negroes. Hundreds of thousands of slaves were brought to America from this West Africa during the days of the traffic, which began nearly 400 years ago. How much more of Judaism survived among the West African Negroes in that earlier age? As persecuted communities, they were in greater danger than other blacks of being raided by war parties and sold into slavery. It may be considered certain that many partially Judaized blacks were among the slaves brought to America. How many of them could still maintain some Jewish customs here is another question. Before Dr. Godby published his book The Lost Tribes of My People, Rabbi Matthew organized a Hebrew congregation in 1918 and proclaimed that the Negroes of America and the West Indies are the original black Hebrews. There are hundreds of thousands of African black Hebrews scattered throughout the United States, not only in urban areas, but also in rural communities throughout this nation. Willie reveals ample historical evidence. The authenticity of these black Hebrews can no longer be questioned. However, as regards the purity of their Judaism among some of these Jews, that is another matter. Conclusion. According to biblical prophecy, the black Hebrews were to go into slavery and captivity. Thus we read that the prophet Jeremiah said, Judah has gone into captivity because of affliction and great slavery. She dwells among the nations, she finds no rest, all her persecutors overtook her in the straits. Prophecy is similar to history in one respect, namely, it repeats itself. The duality in prophecy has been recognized by many scholars. As the historical evidence indicates, the black Hebrews were snatched from the west coast of Africa and sold into captivity. Jeremiah again says, For behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will bring back the captivity of my people Israel. And Judah, says the Lord, and I will bring them back to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they shall possess it. For it will come to pass in that day, says the Lord of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off your neck, and I will burst your bonds, and no longer will foreigners make him serve you. But they, the Hebrews, will serve the Lord their God and David their king, whom I will raise up for them. Fear not therefore, O my servant Jacob, saith the Lord, neither be ye dismayed, O Israel, for behold, I will save thee from afar, and thy seed from the land of their captivity, and they shall return. Jacob, and he will be calm and quiet, and no one will make him afraid. For I am with you, says the Lord, to save you. Though I make a complete end of all the nations where I have scattered you, I will not make a complete end of you. But I will discipline you in moderation and will not leave you entirely unpunished. The valley of dry bones, spoken of by the prophet Ezekiel, represents the nations that hold the black Hebrews in bondage and oppression, and the dry bones represent the black Hebrews. Ezekiel says, Then I prophesied as he had commanded me, and breath came into them, and they lived, and stood upon their feet, a very great army. And he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, Our bones are dried up, our hope is lost, we are without hope. Therefore prophesy and say to them, This is what the Lord God says, I will open your graves and bring you up from your graves and bring you into the land of Israel. The prophet Ezekiel calls the country where the black Hebrews are oppressed, graves. Then you will know that I am the Lord, when I open your graves, O my people, and bring you up from your graves. And I will put my spirit in you, and you shall live, and I will place you in your own land. Then you shall know that I, the Lord, have spoken it and have performed it, says the Lord. Epilogue. As I write these pages, the Reverend Ralph Abernathy is traveling around the country telling the American people, I'm going to Washington to tell the pharaohs to let my people go. As with the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, the leaders in Washington are unlikely to give in to the demands of the Poor People's March. Given all the rampant violence in the United States, there are many signs that the March on Washington will erupt into violence. The power structure gives nothing without a demand. When the government retreats to carry out reforms and enforce justice, the people lose respect for the institutions of law and order. Law and order without justice has no value in a democracy. When peaceful demonstrations fail to soften the government's attitude, militants must employ vigorous and militant tactics to impose themselves on the government. These tactics sometimes approach anarchy. At this point of tension, a mass movement can go in one of two directions. If the government gives in to the demands of the people, all is well. The mass movement collapses because it has achieved its objective. On the other hand, if the government rejects the demands of the mass movement, it usually suppresses rebellion or civil disobedience. When the people continue to rebel and the government continues to repress, this condition leads to fascism and dictatorship. This is followed by mass murder, which is committed in the name of law and order. Dr. Martin Luther King expressed these thoughts before he was assassinated. If conditions do not change soon in this country, we will have a fascist police state by the 1970s. I do not believe that America has the moral strength and will to solve its racial problem and prevent a fascist takeover, but if prompt, collective, and constructive action is taken immediately, we can save American cities from disaster. If a police state is established in America, the prophecy of Daniel will be fulfilled. And at that time there shall arise a great multitude of people, and a great multitude of people shall be put to death. Michael, the great prince who defends the children of your people, and there will be a time of distress, such as has not been since there was a nation until that time, and at that time your people will be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. Daniel 12 verse 1. End of this wonderful audio book.